Good evening, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's council meeting. My name is Councillor Hamza Tozal and I'm the Lord Mayor of Westminster. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all members that we are live streaming this meeting and therefore microphones will be active when members are speaking and the cameras will be broadcasting until the meeting closes. A list of all the members who are present will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Agenda item 1, appointment of relief chair. As I may need to vacate the chair during the meeting, I propose that Councillor Angela Piddock be chosen to take the chair as necessary. May I please have a seconder for my motion? Councillor Noble has seconded my motion that Councillor Angela Piddock chairs the meeting as necessary. Unless any member objects, the motion will be deemed to be agreed. If anybody has any objections, please say so now. Thank you. Councillor Piddock, please join me on the dais. Agenda item 2, minutes from previous meeting. Unless any member wishes to raise a point of order relating to the accuracy of the minutes, I will consider that members are content that I sign the minutes of the last meeting. Please state now if you wish to raise a point of order. Today's the 8th. Thank you. Thank you. The minutes are agreed. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. It is necessary to declare any interest in relation to the issues in which there will be a vote. These items are set out in relation to the issues, these are set out on the list of speakers in the order paper. Members need to declare an interest in the item selected for debate if they are speaking in that debate. All members in attendance were asked to identify in advance of the meeting if they have an interest to declare. There is no need to declare an interest purely on account of being a council tax or business rates payer, nor a need for any member to declare an interest in the members' allowances item. If anyone has any other disclosable pecuniary interests or any other significant interest to declare, please do so now. Thank you. Before I move on to agenda item 4, I just would like to say a happy International Women's Day. I think today's the day, so happy International Women's Day. We are quite proud of, I'm quite proud anyway of the women in my life and the people who've helped me get to where I am. Hopefully you guys are as well. I know as a council we strive to be as diverse and as representative as possible. And I think we do that both internally in terms of council staff, but also in terms of our elected representatives. So it's a huge privilege to work alongside you all, and hopefully for many more years to come. We now move on to agenda item 4. The report of the Cabinet is in 6 paragraphs with recommendations on each section. I propose, as in previous years, to allow the one debate to encompass the budget and council tax item and the remainder of the Cabinet report before we vote on these. In accordance with statutory requirements, I intend to call formally recorded votes on the recommendation of the Cabinet on the budget and council tax item, which is paragraph 1 of the report. With the agreement of both parties, the formally recorded votes will be undertaken by a show of hands. I will not ask the Chief Executive to call the name of each member of the Council. The names of those voting for, against, or abstaining will be recorded in the minutes. We shall then move to vote on paragraphs 2 to 6 of the report of the Cabinet. A list of those councillors who have been nominated to speak has been tabled on the blue order paper. This list also sets out the order in which the votes will be taken at the end of the debate. All speeches are up to 5 minutes, except for a few on the list that may be up to 10 or 20 minutes. Can I ask that members keep to their allocated times as closely as possible? At 9:20 p.m, if the debate is still in progress, or at the end of the debate, if earlier, I will call the leader of the council to reply to the debate for up to 10 minutes. The division bell will then be rung to signify that the budget votes are to be taken by formally recorded votes. Once the division bell has finished, no member will be allowed to enter the meeting until all the voting on the budget has concluded. The opposition group have indicated they wish to debate the General Purposes Committee report on member allowances. This debate will take place after the voting has concluded on the Cabinet report. Speakers and the order of the votes for this item are also tabled on the blue order paper. I now call the Leader of the Council, Councillor Adam Hugg, to make his leader's speech.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I want to begin tonight by quoting the next Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. I'm sorry, he recently spoke of how in power Labour raises our sights above the quick fixes, the pandering to the noisy crowd, the short-termism that will only ever provide the sticking plaster. And that's what tonight's budget is about. With this first Labour budget in Westminster Council's history, now it is time to start fixing the fundamentals. We are bringing together the resources, attention and talents of the Council and our communities to finally address the rampant inequality that has been left unchecked for far too long. It is not a budget that claims to undo all those things overnight, because like Keir, Labour in Westminster is realistic about what can be achieved in a single electoral cycle. But it's one that's both taking tough decisions today and is also investing for the longer-term gain of our communities. But make no mistake, we're committed to the long haul, and that means planning for our city's future, something that will require a second term and beyond. This is an ambitious budget, but with an achievable vision, an approach that sees social justice combined with effective services. This is a budget that puts residents first, by responding to a national crisis as best we can. This is a budget that radically invests in truly affordable housing, the likes of which this council has not seen before and for which our council tenants and residents have been waiting for far too long. It's a budget focused on shared opportunity by boosting our high streets and local economies from the north to the south, as well as the West End. Lord Mayor, this is a budget for a fairer Westminster. It's been said before, but tonight it bears repeating, that sitting here last March, it was far from certain that we'd have the opportunity to be now on this side of the chamber to put our money where our mouths were, as it were. It is an absolute privilege to be in this position where our policy ideas are no longer that, just ideas, but very real commitments that we're making to the people of Westminster and that we've been delivering on over the last year and in this budget. And that's because we know for too long not enough has been done to chip away at the pervasive and ingrained inequality faced by the same communities within Westminster, generation after generation. It's why Westminster has some of the most deprived and least deprived areas in the country sitting side by side. It's why the life expectancy of two men who grow up only 4 miles apart can differ by 16 years. And it's why 31,000 households in Westminster, more than a quarter of the households in the city, are classed as vulnerable. This inequality is not going to be reversed overnight. But through targeted interventions and effective partnership working with the voluntary and private sectors, I believe we can have an impact and that we can make a real difference to the lives of our residents. Because we know that it is only by backing all the people and places in our city that we can truly build a fairer Westminster. And through our record of delivery over the last year and the plan set out in this budget tonight, we are making fundamental improvements to the lives of our residents. We want our residents to live in fairer communities where everyone feels safe, adults can stay healthy, community and voluntary sector organisations prosper, and Westminster is made a great place to raise a family. And Councillors Les and Butler Falassis are working hard to make that a reality. For future generations, we need a fairer environment, a net zero council by 2030 and a net zero city by 2040, cleaner air, increased recycling, more sustainable travel, and high quality services in walking distance from people's homes. And Councillors Noble and de Moldenberg are setting out today how we're putting those ambitions into practice. And led by Councillor Noble and Councillor Begum, we want to deliver fairer housing, meeting housing need through more genuinely affordable housing, action to reduce homelessness, and improve satisfaction with our housing services and stock. And we're also committed to delivering a fairer economy with Councillor Barraclough at the helm. And Oxford Street and the West End are pivotal to Westminster remaining successful and must retain their position in the national economy. But our small businesses must also be supported to grow and remain, with ample access for our residents to both gain the necessary skills and the ability to discover the city's employment opportunities. And finally, thanks to Councillor Boothroyd, a fairer council, one that's more transparent, accessible, and where people can more easily find the information and services that they need. So I'm pleased tonight that we'll be voting on including an element at full council meeting from June where our residents can directly have their voices heard in this chamber. But putting our long-term ambition for the city aside a moment, it cannot be ignored that we are currently in the depths of a national cost of living crisis. This winter, people have struggled to turn their heating on to feed their families. And all of this is happening supposedly in one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Where is the fairness in that? And that's why in Westminster we have done as much as we possibly can to help our residents through these tough times. Firstly, we've frozen the General Leeds Council tax for 2023-24, just as we promised here last year. Because we knew then, as we know now, that the Conservative cost of living crisis was only set to deepen in the months ahead. And with an unprecedented support package, we've brought together over £4 million of investment from the Council alongside the Government's hardship funding to help those most in need. And before Christmas, we made the important decision to provide free school meals for all of our primary school children starting this January. This was a move welcomed by our parents, kids, teachers, anti-poverty groups, churches, basically everyone except the party opposite. And we're delighted that one of the biggest fans of our plans was Sadiq Khan. And the Mayor of London's decision to provide funding for primary school meals across the capital for the next academic year means that we can now do more. So after working closely with Councillor Rocker and Sarah Newman over recent weeks, I'm delighted to announce that we'll be expanding our free school meals offer to all 3- and 4-year-olds across our maintained and PVI nurseries, and at Key Stage 3 for every 11 to 14-year-old resident at Westminster Secondary School. There will also be targeted help for 2-year-olds receiving the free early education entitlement. And this means overall that we can now offer 14,000 children in Westminster a nutritious meal, taking some of the pressure away from families at a time when we know they're already struggling. It is deplorable that in this day and age parents are going without, trying to fill a lunchbox with whatever's left in the cupboard and however meagre to make sure that their child doesn't go hungry. This action today is not simply a response to the Conservative cost of living crisis. We need to see equality built into the system for generations to come. And this is a down payment on a fairer future for our children and families. And Lord Mayor, the other side of the chamber may once again, as they did last time, claim that free school meals is headline-grabbing gesture politics. And they might say that what we're trying to do is actually the business of central government alone. But where is their government? They are nowhere to be seen. And it's because local authorities across the country have been left with no other option by successive prime ministers, who we know, of course, more harm than good, especially in recent months. And by government that is now coming to a sputtering, shambolic end after well over a decade of chaos. For the first time in a long time, under Labour, Westminster is stepping up while the Conservative government is stepping back and preparing to step down. And it's not as though in their legacy they will have left local government in a great position either, because they've been passing the buck for years. Since 2010, Council have faced real-term reductions in core government funding of £15 billion. And over those 13 long Conservative years, our council alone had to find £196 million in savings and new revenue to strive to close the budget gap created by the Conservative government. This has been done and will be done in the years ahead. But unlike the previous administration, we aren't going to pretend that this has had no impact on council capacity and services in some areas. And in this budget tonight, we have had to identify over £28 million so far in savings from now until 2026-27. And we're working with services to find out what more is needed to address the challenges left by 13 years of austerity. Heavy inflation and sluggish growth has been exacerbated by the impact of Trussonomics and an extreme ideological implementation of Brexit. It has, however, been reassuring to see that in a number of income areas, such as corporate property, things are slowly recovering from the impact of the pandemic as our city comes back to life. Now, as the budget papers make clear, we're working hard to find further efficiencies in the council's contracts that come up for renewal, by working creatively with suppliers and by looking closely at all options, including where appropriate insourcing. And the vital work being done to reduce our carbon footprint will not only make us greener, but it will help us make new savings on energy costs. But again, we aren't going to pretend that this will be easy as we battle through the Tory sluggish economy and with ministers who have lost the will to govern. And there are some efficiencies that simply won't fly with us. And those are the ones that harm frontline services that our residents, particularly the most vulnerable, value and rely on. And the Tories signed off a programme of rolling cuts in the budget from 2021 onwards for public protection and licensing that would have seen reduction in the number of city inspectors. But under Labour, staffing levels of city inspectors will be protected, ensuring that there will be additional permanent city inspector resource on the ground. As well as ensuring that services are working in the best interests of residents, we've also stepped up investment in the well-being and future of our communities. In this budget, we include an additional £500,000 for adult mental health, more than £240,000 for family hubs, and £670,000 for the Community Priorities Programme, which supports community-led projects that empower our young people, build connections, and make our places safe, sustainable and welcoming. So when it comes to Westminster's economy, Oxford Street and the West End are critical, and we want to ensure their continued success for the long term. The recovery from the pandemic has been long and winding, and it's to the credit of efforts of our partners like our bids who have fought hard over the past 3 years for their members and for our high streets. But at the same time, our local communities and high streets in other parts of the city have not always, over the years, benefited from equitable investment. That is long overdue, and Westminster should and is increasing the scale of our ambition for those areas, with more resource, more investment, and a stronger council presence. And I want to acknowledge the work of the Future of Westminster Commission, which has helped, amongst many other things, shape our new North Paddington programme, a place-based, joined-up approach to service delivery and problem-solving, which will unleash new ways of working with our communities in the northwest of the borough. With a capital commitment of £20 million over 4 years, and the revenue support needed to get stuff moving, we will make North Paddington's communities and public spaces healthier, happier and safer. But it's far from just North Paddington. An additional £9.5 million in investment for place-based working will allow us to test our approaches in other parts of the city, such as Pimlico, Edgware Road and Queensway, alongside many other investments from our wide-ranging capital programme. Over time, our responsible business network has grown, with more businesses getting involved to support the cost of living crisis and to provide help to community organisations in our city. Since last April, developers have committed more than £1.3 million, which will support the work of the Westminster Employment Service. And by introducing the London Living Wage as a minimum requirement for all jobs advertised by the service, they are helping our residents to gain good, well-paid jobs here on their doorstep. And underpinning our approach will be a new Westminster anchor network, building on the work of the Future Westminster Commission and Bloomberg Associates. And this will bring together major employers based in Westminster and organisations committed to local recruitment, buying locally, and making an impact in the communities that need our support the most. And this represents an important shift in how we drive change, generate benefit, and pace, of which those benefits are felt in our communities. But Lord Mayor, I want now to focus on a fundamental service that the Council provides, and that's housing. We're all versed in the enormous scale of the challenge. Nearly 3,000 households in temporary accommodation, over 4,000 households waiting for a council home, and spiralling private rent for so many in our city, all within our very dense 8 square miles. And with a government unwilling to make the changes necessary to sort this problem, including the lack of reform to housing benefit, we don't have the luxury of hoping that the problem will go away by itself. And of course, our obligation to act wouldn't be so urgent if the previous administration had actually done its job. For decades, they allowed developers to get away with daylight robbery, escaping from their obligations to build anywhere near the level of affordable housing they were supposed to. And they also fundamentally failed to replace the stock lost to right to buy. As I said, the challenge is enormous, but we want to tackle it head on. And that's why under Labour, this council has almost doubled its investment in temporary accommodation, with an extra £85 million being added to the budget. This funding will allow for 270 additional homes to be purchased in or around Westminster over the next 3 years. And we've already doubled the numbers purchased this year when compared to the last year of the previous administration. We are realistic about the overall impact this investment will have when it comes to trying to cover the enormous pressures that are currently on temporary accommodation. But the measure of success is not whether we can wave a magic wand and solve the whole problem. It's about whether we have maximised every opportunity that is available to us to do more. If we can act, we should. It might not make a difference to everyone, but it will make a difference to many, and that is what matters. We are also firmly focusing on ramping up the delivery of affordable homes across the city, with more homes now added into the delivery pipeline. Through a partial review of the city plan, we will strengthen our policies on affordable housing, including getting the right tenure mix, requiring affordable housing contributions from high-end smaller developments, and prioritising retrofit over demolition and rebuild where appropriate. A new affordable housing SPD will make it clear to developers exactly how and when they need to deliver on their planning obligations, while clearly setting out how we plan to make intermediate housing more affordable to families on ordinary incomes and better able to meet the needs of our key workers. Because again, we know we can't do this alone. I'm pleased that finally working in partnership with the Mayor of London to deliver more affordable homes in Westminster. After decisive resident ballots on Church Street and Ebury, we've secured additional funding from the GLA that should bring almost 70 million additional pounds to support our major regeneration schemes, in addition to the work funding for small sites. And last week alone, we saw almost £40 million of GLA funding coming into the council's bank account, which will help us immediately contribute to new social housing, enabling us to deliver 300 new council homes for social rent beyond the plans we inherited from the Conservatives. And that's funding that the Tories were content to leave on the table, not just out of spite because it came from the Mayor of London, but because they were afraid of what it might mean if residents were allowed to have their say on the future of their homes. Well, now residents have had their say, and our council is the better for it. And it goes to show that listening to our residents and communities is the right thing to do. It really matters. It's not something we take for granted or see as a checkbox exercise after the fact. And I'm proud of the work being led by Councillors Less and Sandquist that is going into reforming the Council's approach to consultation. It's quite a big tanker to turn around, but we're making progress. It's only by listening to the people of our city that we can get it right. Not always, but as much as possible. Lord Mayor, in the lead up to this budget, I've given a lot of thought to what success looks like to us. Because, as I've said, success isn't always about solving the whole problem. Sometimes it's about doing what we can to mitigate the difficulties of many residents' lives. Putting down our marker against what's important. Showing the people that we represent their priorities. And maximising every opportunity to us to say as a council, you know what, there might be something new or something more that we can do to help you. Many people in our city are struggling, but many have struggled for some time now. This is a budget that recognises, through the responsible use of reserves and sound budget management, we can and should support those most in need, both in this time of crisis and for the longer term. This will not, however, come at the expense of delivering high-quality local services, because we know the value of clean streets, regular bin collections and low council tax to all of our residents. So, Lord Mayor, we will back the people of Westminster every step of the way, and we will do that through this budget by building a fairer Westminster.
I now call, excuse me, Councillor, start again, this threw me off, yeah. I now call Councillor Rachel Overton to speak.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I'm sorry I didn't get the memo about a quote from the current and future Prime Minister, otherwise I would have asked Rishi Sunak for something to start my speech. But Lord Mayor, tonight we've heard the Leader of the Council set out his budget, a fairer budget for a fairer Westminster. Now, I don't propose to set out tonight an alternative budget because, quite frankly, it's going to be 3 years before we again set the budget. So rather than waste my time setting out ideas which won't be adopted, let me instead focus on whether this really is a fairer budget for the people of Westminster, and indeed how robust the assumptions and process are on which it depends. This is Westminster's taxpayers' money spent to provide vital services for them. So it's critical that the numbers can be trusted. But first, let me turn to their proposal on council tax, which of course affects almost all of our residents. In their manifesto less than a year ago, they were clear that they would freeze council tax until 2024. Yet tonight we know that they are going to raise it by 2% to levy the adult social care precept. The adult social care precept. Their rationale is that this is what we, the Conservatives, did last year. And we did. We raised it by 1%, which they opposed. But it's a pretty poor political argument to say they're going to do something just because we did. And moreover, we know that they don't approve of levying the social care precept because they voted against it last year. How then can they square the decision to raise it by 2%, having only just promised the electorate no rises? And I don't think the argument, can't help himself, can he, Lord Mayor? And I don't think the argument, because the Tories would have done it, is going to get them very far. Isn't it a worrying first precedent for our residents of what Labour will do to their taxes when in power? It is quite frankly terrifying enough to see the part of their council tax bills levied by the Lord Mayor of London rising by another London, Labour Mayor of London, I'm over promoting him, rising by another 9% this year. That's almost 60% over the last 7 years on our residents, without the council's part also being raised. It's the legacy of years of Conservative administration which have kept Westminster council tax the lowest in the country for our residents. But for how long will that continue? So, I'm glad they're enjoying this. So, let's move on to the process of setting this year's budget. Because it's not as if the Labour Party didn't have enough time to get ready for this. And in the amendment they tabled last year in this chamber, they were very clear what their process would be, helpfully. Number one, implementing a zero-based budget review, ensuring every penny is spent on local community needs. Number two, establishing a critical funds board of independent local government experts to seek new savings and tackle waste.
That's Neil Coleman.
Number three, well, maybe it is. Number three, he's doing everything else, beginning a trial of participatory budgeting so that residents can be involved in the process. And these were also clearly set out in their manifesto. But when I asked the Cabinet Member for Finance at the last full council whether he had implemented any of these, he merely said that he'd had a conversation about it. So that means not very much has been done. But Lord Mayor, if you really believed there was waste and the potential for savings, why on earth wouldn't you have implemented these things, which might have meant that you wouldn't have had to raise council tax by 2%? In the middle of a cost of living crisis, wouldn't you have turned over every stone and delivered on your manifesto commitment in order to avoid burdening people with an extra bill? How is that a fairer budget? Now, I wouldn't mind betting that tonight, after I've challenged Tim again on it, he's going to announce a zero-based budget. So we look forward to that. I'll bet you I'm right. And while we're on the subject, one of the other things they said they would do, one of their favourites repeated every year, was to reduce spending on temporary agency staff. Last year, in their proposed amendment, the gift that keeps on giving, they committed to saving at least £1.5 million in 22-23 by reducing temporary staff costs. But when we look at the numbers for the end of December, they have made not a single reduction, not a single one, in the numbers of temporary staff versus a year before. If they'd delivered on this pledge, it would have more than covered the cost of the adult social care levy, not needing to burden our residents with it. And what of other budget proposals? £1 million from cutting the public relations budget, and of course their favourite, £400,000 from cutting the Westminster Reporter. None of these have happened. Yep. And I also note, Lord Mayor, that they propose cutting £100,000 from your budget, but I haven't noticed you arriving on a bicycle this evening, so I assume that hasn't happened. And if they'd done any of these things they pledged to do, they might even have been able to fund a rebate for band A to D taxpayers, as our neighbours in Conservative-run RBKC have done. It wouldn't offset the massive bill from London's Labour Mayor, but it would help. And it also might have meant they wouldn't already be cutting into reserves to pay for unfunded new spending pledges. So let's look at some of the key items in the budget. First, capital. We know the viability of the major regeneration schemes at Church Street and Ebury Bridge were already thin in any case, but the switch away from affordable key worker housing towards social will stretch this further. There is only so much money their friend Sadiq Khan can give them. We know he's giving them a lot more. But with developers also telling us that the council's planning department has seized up, what is the outlook for SIL receipts, which they seem to be relying on? And what of those low-income key workers desperate to get on the Westminster housing ladder when less than 2% of our city's housing stock is affordable rent versus 25% social rent? How is that fairer to those teachers, nurses, young people starting out? This is sending a clear message that Westminster is not a place where there will be any housing for them. Hardly a fairer Westminster for them. The next biggest item, it's not our legacy, as you know. You've changed it. The next biggest item in the capital budget is the PDHU, or at least you would assume so. We've heard numerous times, including in maiden speeches, that the works to invest and renovate these are critical and urgent. Indeed, in responses to questions at the Budget Task Group, officers said the Council is committed to decarbonising the PDHU. A strategic outline case was approved in January 2023, setting out 4 options for this work, with the costs estimated between 175 and 225 million pounds. Yet we're being asked this evening to sign off an HRA budget for the next 15 years, which only includes a figure of 13.3 million, the maintenance for the next few years. Where is this roughly 200 million? Why is there no provisional figure set out in the budget? How can anyone trust this capital budget when one of the single biggest items for us as a council isn't included? We're all agreed that something desperately needs to be done to address the PDHU, both for the sake of our residents and to meet our carbon emission goals. But if this administration has established the likely costs, it needs to be budgeted. And what of the cost to leaseholders? For many, indeed most, this will be a completely unaffordable bill. What is being done by this administration to engage with them about this project, which could mean many of them having to sell their homes because they can't afford the bill? My colleague, Councillor Pitford, has twice raised in this chamber the need to consider installing individual electric boilers in people's flats. Is any work being done on this? This administration, good, we look forward to hearing about it. This administration came to power promising to have community engagement at the centre of everything they do. But what community engagement has there been with the leaseholders of Pimlico about these massive costs coming down the road towards them? So not a fairer budget for leaseholders, at least not in Pimlico. And what of our social tenants? On top of failing services, social tenants are facing a rent hike of 7%, fortunately capped at 7% by the Secretary of State. But this administration, this cabinet member has decided to raise it by the absolute maximum allowed.
Momentum.
Now, I know that last year we raised rents by 6%. We did. But they voted against that. And the cabinet member was vociferous in her attack on my colleague Councillor Harvey. In fact, I think you still bear the scars, don't you, Councillor Harvey?
I do indeed.
So how do they now justify their decision to raise it by even more? How does she justify that? How do they explain to those social tenants who saw them attacking us last year and must have assumed that that therefore wouldn't happen under Labour, that they've raised rents by even more during a cost of living crisis?
Incredible.
Is it any wonder that Councillor Cunningham received an email from a resident saying, I voted for Labour to sort out housing, but it's actually got worse? And talking of ferocious speeches, because we all enjoy them, last year I also recall Councillor Butler-Thalasis, sorry Nafsika, I should have called you that, ripping into our plans for adult social care and arguing how different it would be if she were in charge. Much more investment and none of these savings. But she's accepted all of our budget savings proposals for adult social care, which we proposed, and she railed against it. So, not much different. Moving on to city management, the parking fee structure review, we are told, will raise an additional 3.25 million over the next 2 years. Now, Councillor Fisher, when he very ably chaired the group, commented that he was quite happy for owners of Lamborghinis to pay through the nose. And I wouldn't disagree with you. Perhaps, yes, you did. I was sitting next to you. And I wouldn't disagree. But there aren't enough owners of Lamborghinis, sadly not on our side. Against a backdrop of falling car use anyway, the only way these numbers can possibly be achieved and therefore be relied on in this budget is by hammering those people who bought small, clean cars because they thought they were making the right choice, and also those with electric vehicles. The numbers are so precise, it's clear they already know what the additional revenue will come from. So tonight, we need the Cabinet member to set out how this will be achieved and confirm how heavy the charges that he intends to impose on electric vehicles. And what of the service which affects every single one of our residents every single day? The waste collection and street cleansing service. We were told at the Budget Task Group by the head of that service that Veolia is quite happy to absorb the cost of at least 4 waste collections every week for our residents, rather than the 3 under us, given that this new administration has committed to keep the second black bin collection for all residents. But we actually know what's really happening. We can see it on our streets. Other corners are being cut. Dumped rubbish isn't being collected so quickly. The pavement isn't swept after the rubbish is collected, meaning detritus left strewn across our pavements, maybe not in your wards, but certainly in ours. That is the result for our residents, a deterioration in service which impacts all of us. And as for carbon emission targets, yes, more waste will be collected, but we know food waste, but we know it will be nowhere near enough to hit our recycling target as a city, as they're keeping both black big collections for all residents. But Lord Mayor, there's another group of residents for whom this doesn't feel fair. All those who don't live in the north of the city, and specifically a Labour ward in the north of the city. Is this a fairer budget for them? We've heard much about the future of Westminster Commission, which will be proposing policies and deciding priorities, as we heard at scrutiny from its chair. Yet, deciding priorities, as he said, as Neil Coleman said at the Scrutiny Commission. Yet these are all made up of representatives from the north of Westminster, or with no connection to Westminster at all.
Labour Party.
We even have one strand of work chaired by the MP for Westminster North, but no involvement at all for the MP who represents all those living in the centre and south of the borough.
Funny that.
Do their views not matter at all? What message does this send for those residents who didn't vote Labour or who don't live in the north? This administration isn't interested in your views. Indeed, of the 4 Communities Priorities Grant Programme pilots which have been launched with £300,000 of funding each, all 4, guess what, were for Labour wards in the north.
Really?
Surprise.
Why couldn't there have been at least one of these pilots in the south? Deprivation exists in the centre and south of the city as well. Communities in the centre and south of the city need support as well. Their priorities matter as well.
Hear, hear.
But when we talk of fairness, Lord Mayor, in this chamber, this all pales into insignificance compared to what this administration is proposing to award themselves as allowances. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, with so many of our residents struggling to make ends meet, they are proposing awarding their cabinet members a 45% increase.
Whoa, sure.
How can they possibly explain to our residents that this is fair to vote through an increase for themselves with, I should be clear, absolutely no support from the Conservative councillors on this side of the chamber? And Deputy Cabinet members, in 2014, Councillor Boothroyd, actually, the Labour Party tabled an amendment to the budget before full council calling for all Deputy Cabinet member allowances to be scrapped. In fact, they felt so strongly about it that they tabled the amendment again in 2016 and 2017, 3 times. So we know what their position is about Deputy Cabinet member allowances. Yet what do they now do once they're in power? You'd think, given that they called for Deputy Cabinet member allowances to be scrapped, how many times? 3 times. That they would be the first to go. But no, They are proposing an inflation-busting increase of 15%. The numbers are so big, I lose track. 15%. How can they possibly justify this? They also called for councillors to receive no more than one special responsibility allowance. Yet now, in power, 14 of their members receive more than one, with some receiving 4, and 2 cabinet members even receiving more than one.
Oh dear.
What happened to their calls for this to end? How can the residents of Westminster trust them to keep their promises when even in their first year they've broken all of these commitments which they made?
Tut tut.
How can our residents, worried sick about the cost of living crisis, facing a 7% rise in their rent and another huge bill from London's Labour Mayor, understand cabinet members sitting there and voting through massive pay rises for themselves? But let me say this, Turn. Here's an offer to you. If you really believe this is justified, make this the first element of your participatory budget programme. Take this to our residents and see whether they think it would be fairer to spend £180,000 of taxpayers' money over the next 3 years on up to 45% pay rises for the majority group, in fact a handful of the majority group, or would it be fairer to spend that money, funded by taxpayers, to help the poorest people in Westminster? Without the support of our residents through this process, this increase would be truly shameful.
Yep.
And would make a mockery of any pledge to engage with residents, start participatory budgeting, or listen to their priorities. You can't just take the decisions that you want to, you have to take all of these which are critical. And actually, the way you behave and the way you treat allowances is critical in terms of showing your commitment to our residents. So, Lord Mayor, what we have before us this evening is not a fairer budget for a fairer Westminster. It's not fair if you're a leaseholder facing massive bills. It's not fairer if you're a social tenant with a 7% rent increase and a repair service which doesn't respond. It's not fairer if you live in the central south of the city and your view doesn't matter. It's not fairer if you're worried about bills and can only dream of voting for yourself to have a 45% pay rise. Wouldn't that be nice? It's not fairer if you're a low-income, hard-working person or family who's desperate to get on the housing ladder and sees all hope of that disappearing. And it's not fairer if you were a Westminster resident who believed what Labour said to you before the election.
Councillor David Boothroyd.
Lord Mayor. The first budget of the first Labour administration of Westminster City Council constitutes only the first step, but it will be the greatest step this council has ever made towards a fairer Westminster. I want sincerely to thank the officers who have helped this parsimonious Yorkshireman. In the short time that we've been in office, through the process of preparing this budget, and I'm going to make a special mention of Rick Taylor, who is moving on and was a very great help. And how many times have I imagined what I might have to do, though if you told me 20 years ago I'd ever actually be doing it, I don't think I would have believed you.
Me too.
That's not, well, actually what I'd have thought is, don't tell me I'm going to defect to the Tories. I have to say, it was not an easy process. Had the Labour government's local government settlement from 2010 been uprated in line with CPI inflation, we would have had 175 million more. And just in case we were tempted to trust the present Conservative government this year, well, Lucy pulled the football away. They scrapped the £1.7 million tier services grant, they cut the services grant by £2.7 million, and they sliced the new homes bonus by £2 million. So much for the Conservatives nationally. But our predecessors locally left us with a 14.3 million budget gap for this year. And then when we looked at their budget in detail, we discovered some nasty surprises in the form of savings put in by the Conservative administration upon which the council was never going to be able to deliver.
Shame.
There was the obviously unachievable income that they were expecting from the library service. There was the idea that going from a byborough to our own sovereign digital service would save £500,000. Actual savings are going to be nil. And as Councillor Hugg observed, there's also the great euphemism of a future city management programme, written up as a £2 million saving and efficiency, through driving efficiencies, it said, turning out to involve totally unacceptable cuts in city inspectors. I am happy to confirm that those cuts will not now go ahead. We have also been managing with huge budget pressures, including the severe impact from a spike in inflation. I don't think it's any secret our manifesto pledges were decided upon long before that inflationary bubble was apparent. Those pressures required identifying new savings and efficiencies, some 15 million, which have been found in areas that do not reduce services. We have also sought to increase income. That includes the social care precept, which is billed separately, in line with the consistent history of this council, always taking the full amount. I would draw the council's attention to the fact that the annual increase in social care spending is far higher than the 1.2 million raised by the social care precept. Our capital strategy is undoubtedly ambitious and will need careful monitoring. And Councillor Barraclough will be speaking about the shocking state of the Oxford Street project before we took over, as found by Mike Cook. And we will have more to announce on that to come. We have to plan for the long term, and the additional spending to acquire temporary accommodation is needed to relieve the 9.7 million pressure on the revenue budget from providing temporary accommodation. That impacts on funding across the city, everywhere. And also, we have an ethical imperative to help people like the woman who I saw in surgery on Saturday. She was living in my ward. She has been given temporary housing in Barking. She has to transport her children across the city every day to schools in North Westminster. It's making her ill, it's making the children ill. The largest individual items in the capital programme, they are the development schemes to provide high quality social homes. And we have been able to improve the plans we inherited to deliver more truly affordable housing. The housing revenue account business plan has had to cope with significant rising costs and constricted income in a ring-fenced budget. When the government orders rents kept down but does not provide funding to make it up, that is precisely what leads housing providers to cut maintenance, and that leads to damp and mould problems for tenants. We cannot let that happen in Westminster, so we have had to increase rents, and we're also doubling the stock condition surveys to detect mould. Turning to the general fund. This budget begins to deliver a fairer Westminster, and I'm very grateful to the members of the Budget Task Group for their work in scrutinising this budget. To fund some new investments, we are applying limited sums which have been sitting unused in various earmark reserves for many years. To put this spend into context, the total amount over 4 years is 1/40th of the total earmarked reserves. It is money earmarked for spending that, like Godot, is never going to arrive. It was put aside for a rainy day, and it is now raining. Or, as the Irish priesthood would put it, that money was just resting in those accounts. I am confident that the people of Westminster would want to see it put to use, and we will look to add any ongoing commitments into the base budget when we can. But I am happy to confirm this budget makes no call on unearmarked reserves in the general fund balances. I must update the Council in respect of paragraph 10.16 in the report, taking into account the improvement in the forecast outturn for the current financial year. The forecast level of general fund reserves as at the 31st of March this year will be 54.4 million. This is the highest level of any London borough in both absolute and relative terms. I am accordingly proposing a Labour budget which involves the lowest council tax level in the country without any tricks. There will, I want to just wind back because there was a certain element of right-wing Twitter who reacted last year to the news that Westminster Council had gone for Labour control with, "I do hope that Westminster sees a large increase in council tax next time around, will serve them right." Genuine tweet. Plenty of others were making that sort of comment, but not just that, because Councillor Robertson solemnly told us at this meeting last year, a Labour-run council will mean high tax. And Councillor Swaddle had also heard voices in his head purporting to be Westminster Labour demanding tax rises. We have never actually proposed tax rises on this council. But for anybody who thought a Labour council would mean tax rises, you've had your answer. It's on here. It's a freeze. And that's an answer not just to the last election, but to all the Tory propaganda going through the years. I want to briefly expand on that point. We could have gone to the referendum limit. It's 5%. We could have given ourselves an extra 2 million more of revenue spending to apply anywhere we want. We could have chosen to add it to the base budget. There are a lot of things that could have funded.
It did.
We could have done that. We chose not to. With this budget, Westminster Labour meets its pledge to freeze the Westminster element of the council tax. It's done, and it is part of responsible budgeting, not like Tory Thurrock, who's gone bust with a 1.5 billion debt and increasing council tax by 10%. When you can recruit more apprentices, employ more staff to help people with learning disabilities, fund more short breaks for carers, set up a design review panel, support communities in the cost of living crisis, get more help for mental health well-being, support more small businesses, build more genuinely affordable homes, provide free school meals, employ more housing officers, open community hubs, and all for a real terms tax cut. Why would anybody ever want to go back to the previous administration? I commend this
Councillor Paul Swaddle.
Lord Mayor, oh dear, where do I start on this budget? Firstly, it's a massive broken promise to the residents of Westminster. This administration promised no increase in council tax, no small print, no asterisks, no marker saying except for this. Yet this budget proposes a 2% increase that, along with the 9.7% additional precept from the Labour Mayor of London, will result in unbearable increases for many of our residents. And this at a time of a cost of living crisis. This doesn't sound very fair. As if putting up council tax was not enough of a burden, this Labour administration has chosen, yes chosen, to increase rents for our stretched residents by 7%. This increase to social housing rent is, by its very nature, only impacting those who are on our lower incomes. That doesn't sound very fair. What else does this budget do? Well, Lord Mayor, not content with impacting our poorest residents, this Labour administration has chosen to slash the number of key worker homes that this council plans to build. This will impact our teachers, our nurses, midwives, social workers, the very people that are key to keeping this city going. This squeezed middle will be given no priority in Westminster. That doesn't sound very fair. And Lord Mayor, if that wasn't bad enough, if it wasn't bad enough that they're putting up council tax, increasing people's rent by 7%, cutting key worker homes, they've decided that their priority is to increase cabinet member allowances by 45%. That doesn't sound very fair. Now, Lord Mayor, let me turn to some of the detail of the budget, or rather, Lord Mayor, the lack of detail. For despite the massive promises of this administration's manifesto, there is very little change from the budget that I presented a year ago. I'm glad to see that they've accepted so much of our financial prudency and have implemented in previous years, but I fear that voters will be disappointed to see so little of what they have promised in their manifesto in this budget. Our financial prudence in this and past years has limited their overspend to just over £3 million. And our foresight of forward borrowing £400 million has given them the financial flexibility in difficult economic climate. They're rightly using some of the reserves to tackle the cost of living crisis, as we did for the COVID pandemic. This is exactly what reserves are for, spending to meet the exceptional. However, over the next 2 years, this administration is already planning to spend £38 million of reserves. And whilst there is an ongoing cost of living crisis to deal with, £6 million is going on their pet projects. This should not be funded from reserves. This should be delivered from core spending and budgeted accordingly.
Sorry, Councillor. Can the opposition party please be heard? Just as... Sorry? I said, can the opposition party be heard? Because, exactly.
Well, we heard you.
Just as they have heard the majority party out.
Just so we can all hear each other, and I actually want to hear what's being said as well on both sides, so please let's do that. Thank you.
And all of this before their puppet master, Neil Coleman, reports on their commission findings. What other expensive policy decisions lie just around the corner? Does the cabinet member for finance not know? Or is he, like the rest of the cabinet, awaiting orders from their unelected leader? This budget also lacks any significant efficiency improvements. While in opposition, this administration forever told us that we were not finding enough efficiency gains, and where are they in this budget? They simply don't exist. We consistently brought forward efficiency gains to manage council tax levels. This administration seems unable or unwilling to tackle these. On car parking charges, there is a declining trend in our city. But this administration is predicting a massive increase of over 3.25 million in parking income. With a report on this coming in the summer, we believe this administration has secret plans to hike charges for EV and low pollution vehicles, and I hope this administration confirms that this is not the case.
Silence.
Where have this administration managed to find some savings? Well, they've stripped nearly £100,000 a year out from ward budgets. Money that is given directly to important and critical local projects across our city. Ward budgets have helped food banks, projects for the young and old, and many other local schemes delivered by volunteers across the city, slashed by 100,000. On the capital programme, this administration claims to be able to manage things within the envelope previously set. However, they've simply swept nearly £200 million of expenditure under the carpet. The Pimlico district heating system needs to be replaced. We know that, they know that, officers know that. When questioned at the budget task group, it was agreed that it would be somewhere in the region of £200 million. But where is that in the budget? This is a massive black hole. Also in the capital budget is an increase of 85 million on top of the 92 million that we put into temporary accommodation. However, we have significant concerns on the viability of the 338 units that are proposed, particularly given the pledge to buy in Westminster. This current pricing and availability of units in Westminster suggests this simply won't be possible. The capital programme also sees extensive use of community infrastructure levy. And while this is seen as laudable, this capital income stream is drying up. There's been a massive collapse in planning income with no major developments coming forward, which in turn will lead to a collapse in CIL payments. This administration's policies are putting off developers, and there will be no future CIL if this continues. Lord Mayor, this administration promised a consultative budget process. This has not happened. This administration promised a zero-based budget. It's not happened. And worse, this administration promised no council tax increase. It seems you simply can't trust Labour's pledges. Lord Mayor, it's not a fair budget. A 7% increase on our poorest residents' cost of living, scrapping key worker homes, promising not to increase council tax, then putting it up, and then increasing their own cabinet member allowances by 45%. All it's unacceptable, and that is why we will not be supporting this budget. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Aisha.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As we all know, today is International Women's Day, and while at the Council we are working hard to close pay gaps by the end of 2025, it remains the case that on average across the country, women work the first 56 days of the year for free, a reflection of the not-so-equal society we live in. I'm delighted that to the most recent election we welcomed 12 new female councillors across the chamber. And while I congratulate these formidable women on their election, I want to remember a political trailblazer, Betty Boothroyd, first and only female Speaker of the House of Commons, who died last week, aged 93. Betty's motto was reported to have been, "You never know what people are capable of until you give them the opportunity to show it." This encapsulates my ambition for the people of Westminster as Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Communities and Public Protection. Lord Mayor, I stand in this chamber representing my residents and my city. By extension, this means my friends, my family, my neighbours and my colleagues, those who I have grown up with and watched grow up. Our city is full of diverse voices and stories, and I know firsthand the value of listening to them to make sure we're making changes that matter. I am committed to working with our communities to build better systems for accountability, which can only serve to strengthen partnership working and collaboration. We're not afraid to do things differently, and I'm proud to say that we have been working hard to change how we undertake consultation and engagement by improving the consultation information available on our website. We're giving power back to our residents by making public consultation more transparent and accessible. This is a direct response to the needs of our residents who've told us that they would like more notice of consultations to enable them to put forward considered responses. Soon, we'll be publishing a Charter for Community Participation to give us a set of agreed principles to guide how we work over the next few years, so our residents know their rights and what to expect from us. We'll remove the distance between residents and officers to give our communities influence over the services which we deliver for them. Moving forward, we'll put in our money where our communities are, including allocating a total fund of £600,000 for the Communities Priorities Programme. The programme involves engagement with residents who need support the most. It's decided by communities to invest in capacity building in communities whose needs aren't being met. We've already completed a successful pilot in areas of high need, and this year we will be extending the programme further across the city.
The South.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
As Leader of the Opposition incorrectly stated in her speech earlier on. But we are extending the programme across the city. Everything the Council does should be underpinned by collaboration and increased participation. In February, we launched the ASB strategy after considerable consultation with residents, businesses, partners and, most importantly, victims. In the short term, the strategy will work to resolve instances of ASB, but we need to look at the root causes of this behaviour if we are to bring about long-term change. That is why we are supporting the Change in Futures programme to improve the lives of those facing multiple disadvantages. We are the only London borough to have successfully received funding from the programme after submitting a budget bid. It's important to me that people get the opportunities to comment on our policies and decisions, so we will constantly seek feedback to improve. This year, we will be seeking views on our busking and street entertainment policy to understand the opinions of those who it affects and to see if it has delivered on its original aims. Lord Mayor, I am passionate about policies, and I believe the most effective way of doing this is by listening. Over the coming year, I will work with my Cabinet colleagues to build on our work to empower residents to ensure that our decisions and policies act in the best interest of those we serve. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Tim Rocker.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm proud to stand before you in support of a budget into which so much effort has gone, and I want to thank officers and Councillor Boothroyd for their hard work turning it into a reality. The last 3 years have presented incredible challenges for Westminster, and particularly young people. We live in a city where a quarter of children live in poverty, 32% of 5-year-olds have tooth decay, where more and more are overweight or obese, and an estimated 2,800 5 to 19-year-olds have mental health problems. These are immense challenges exacerbated by COVID and the cost of living into what we have collectively agreed as a council is an emergency. The voluntary sector in our city have been incredible in grappling with these issues, but Lord Mayor, as a famous Welshman once said, private charity can never be a substitute for organised justice. And so, to that end, over the last 9 months, we have worked as a team to start building a fairer Westminster. We said we would create a scheme to support families in need with the cost of school uniform, and we delivered. That we'd expand school holiday activities and fight holiday hunger, and we delivered. Review our leisure centre contracts and ensure the staff were paid properly, and we delivered. Protect our library provision and ensure the long-term future viability of Mayfair Library, and we delivered. Support our most vulnerable residents with a £10 million package to deal with the cost of living crisis, and we delivered. All of this within the confines of inherited budget, Lord Mayor. So imagine what we can do with a budget of our own design. Well, I'll tell you, £248,000 to reopen the Bayswater Family Hub on the 17th of April, making it easier for families to access services. With 95% of our schools rated good or excellent, we want it to stay that way, so we will invest to ensure that they are fit for the future and all children. This includes plans to refurbish the Westminster Cathedral Primary School site for use by College Park Special School and the Short Breaks Service. We also know that physical well-being is also crucial, and we've been listening to our residents. We will wholly refurbish and remodel the Seymour Leisure Centre, incorporating a brand new Marylebone Library. And Lord Mayor, 80% of tourists give culture as their main reason for visiting our city, but for so many of our residents, our cultural offer is exclusionary. That's why, thanks to Councillor Toll's new £1.8 million culture fund, local organisations and schools can bid for funding to deliver community-based projects supporting local artists and organisations. But, Lord Mayor, most importantly, we want to listen to young people and invest in the services that they value, which were decimated by the previous administration. And our youth MPs were crystal clear. They presented me with a letter within a few weeks of us being elected to office, which was polite, but also straightforward. Indeed, I would say it was a bit of an ultimatum. I should also say that there was pressure as well, because our fantastic Lancaster Gate councillors, Councillors Ormsby and Jude, were opening a new youth club on the Hallfield, entirely off their own backs. But I'm proud to say that this budget delivers for young people. Increased funding for youth clubs, improving support for the youth voice, including, for the first time, a dedicated budget for the Youth Council where they will call the shots. And stepping in where the government has stepped back, investing in activities during the half-term holidays, and another £250,000 in summer activities open to more young people across our city. Lord Mayor, these measures in the budget represent annual investment of over £750,000 extra in our young people, which they need. Finally, Lord Mayor, free school lunches. The leader has just announced the fantastic news that we can now support universal free school lunches for Westminster kids from the ages of 3 to 14. I outlined at the last council, where the opposition party failed to support free school lunches, just how important it is, not just for tackling poverty, but for supporting learning. Perhaps more compelling is healthy eating. Our obesity rate for 5-year-olds is 32% of boys and 26% of girls, which has doubled in the last 4 years. In Westminster, 2 in 5 children are now considered overweight by the age of 11. Eating well in early years supports good eating patterns, makes sure that children grow and develop, it protects their teeth and makes sure they're ready for learning. Lord Mayor, as far as we know, we are the first authority in the country to invest in early years provision in this way. This is a historic night for us, the first Labour budget for this city in its history. And Lord Mayor, for myself and colleagues, we don't measure our success in votes or majorities, but in helping support better lives for people who may never know us. This is why we got into politics, this is why we're here, and this is what this budget will do.
Councillor Tim Mitchell.
Lord Mayor, thank you. As we end the 2022-2023 council year, I want to take the opportunity to thank the staff in our adult social care, public health and children's services teams for all their hard work, especially for their handling of the tail end of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd also like to thank Westminster schools for continuing to cope with the continuing impact of the pandemic on their students and also managing the funding pressures caused by falling pupil rolls. For all these departments, we are this evening presented with budget proposals which were very similar to what the 2 Tory Tims presented last year, with the exception of some short-term headline-grabbing initiatives. Despite the impression given last year by the incoming council administration, none of these departments' proposals last year involved cuts in the frontline services received by our residents. But for the budget geeks amongst us, this was evidenced by the fact that there were no full equality impact assessments necessary. I'm glad to see that the same applies to the budget proposals that we are considering tonight. Lord Mayor, first I turn to the adult social care budget. Last year, the new Cabinet member disparagingly referred to a cut of £5 million over 4 years. This year, the new Cabinet member is not seeking to reverse any of our proposals and instead is adding a further £4.72 million from 23 to 25. Last year, our proposals for saving £1.75 million from 22 to 25 through promoting independence were misrepresented by Labour as reducing the care received by our vulnerable residents. Our promoting independence plans focus on 3 main projects: direct payments, digital technology and equipment for older people, and WCC is Home. This year, a further £1.6 million savings have been added for 23 to 27 for a new budget heading offering equipment and technology, direct payments and supporting residents placed outside Westminster to return if they choose to. These plans have been labelled prevention initiatives, perhaps because the new Cabinet member is too embarrassed to use our term of promoting independence because she disparaged it so much last year. I now turn to children's services, where last year our efficiency and financing proposals were referred to by Labour Tim as salami slicing, but this year Tim Rocker is proposing to slice the salami even further, with a further £2 million savings for the next 2 years on top of our £1 million proposals. I do welcome the £0.65 million saving for 23-24 from the joint funding programme, as unfortunately the health service has held back for far too long from paying their fair share of the costs of individual packages of care for children and young people with complex needs. The proposal to reduce by £0.875 million on the staffing budget over the next 2 years will be a challenge, and like Nafsika said last year when she challenged my reduction in the adult social care commissioning team, I hope this does not have a negative consequences for our residents. Lord Mayor, I end by looking at the plans for libraries and leisure centres. I am pleased that our proposal for a new Marylebone Library have been incorporated in the plans for the refurbished Seymour Leisure Centre. It's good to see that the lease on the Mayfair Library has been extended, which we all knew it was going to be, although a year ago Labour scaremongered that it was under threat. It wasn't. We wait with bated breath to see what the plans are for a Vincent Square St James's South Library as promised in the Labour manifesto. Turning to leisure centres, it was good to see the opening of the new Church Street Community Leisure Centre, which was a key part of Conservative plans for the Church Street area. Yeah. I've already mentioned the long-awaited refurbishment of the Seymour Leisure Centre. I hope that the new council can ensure that our plans for upgraded facilities can be completed on time. Finally, I look forward to seeing the new administration's proposals for the rebuilding of the Queen Mother Sports Centre, because doing nothing with this ageing building is not an option for the residents of South Westminster. Lord Mayor, thank you.
Councillor Matt Noble.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Devonish. This is an important moment for us all as we consider the type of city that we want to build. The COVID-19 pandemic and current cost of living crisis have created unprecedented times for our residents. And while the challenges have shown us the resilience and strength of our neighbourhoods and communities, they've also laid bare the stark inequalities that exist within our city. These inequalities are keenly felt by the residents of Church Street, the ward I represent. It remains one of the most deprived areas in London, yet despite this, Church Street is home to a diverse and welcoming community who want to play a central role in the regeneration of their neighbourhood. So how do we work with our communities to design a programme of regeneration which speaks to their priorities and needs? It's simple, really. You ask them. By balloting residents of Church Street in November, December last year, we know that the majority of voters are in favour of our proposals, which include significant improvements to the market, community facilities, play spaces and a new library. But we've also unlocked funding from the GLA, meaning more council housing can be provided for the households that need them most. Similarly, the ballot held for Ebury residents returned an overwhelmingly positive result, with over 90% voting in favour of the programme. Although work on this programme was already underway when we took office in May, and despite calling from the opposition party, we will deliver an additional 130 homes for social rent, and we've secured £40 million of additional funding from the GLA. Funding that was purposely ignored by the previous administration and which has been crucial in delivering more truly affordable housing in Westminster. Church Street and Ebury Bridge are our major schemes, but throughout the city we have a regeneration programme that will deliver a range of different tenure homes. Over the course of the 5-year HRA business plan, we will be investing £461 million across these schemes to deliver 900 new homes for social rent. Lord Mayor, we're committed to delivering on our pledge to deliver more social homes. In October, Cabinet approved the truly affordable housing strategy, which prioritises low-cost social rent council housing on council-led development schemes, providing our residents with a stable, long-term home and security to tenants that often cannot be found in the private renter sector. We estimate there are over 50,000 Westminster residents living in the PRS in Westminster. We all know rents over the last year have risen by around 20%, while energy prices soar and the cost of living crisis bites. Last year, I appeared before the Reforming the Private Rented Sector inquiry to call for more powers for local authorities to act against rogue landlords and for government to step up the protection for private renters at a national level. We'll continue to advocate for stronger regulation to make sure those in the private sector have access to long-term, secure homes. As we begin to reshape the city into one which works for all our residents, we must remain alert to the climate crisis and are committed to becoming a carbon-neutral city council by 2030. We know that our buildings and operations emit an estimated 41,500 tonnes of carbon dioxide every year, and that is why we are reviewing the environmental credentials of council-owned properties. And we are working on PDHU and are developing the outline business case for its upgrade and decarbonisation. This, where the party opposite did nothing at all, while the cost of refitting the network alone rose north of £125 million, and nothing is in the budget for that.
Shame.
Our climate action plan will invest £218 million to retrofit our existing homes to meet Energy Performance Certificate B ratings, to deliver on our climate ambitions, to ensure a greener, cleaner Westminster, and to help mitigate the cost of living crisis at the same time. And while we work to make sure our own house is in order, we recognise that we cannot achieve our wider ambitions alone. And that's why we'll be launching our Climate Citizens Assembly, so that together we can work to address the sustainability issues that matter most to our residents. Lord Mayor, investment in our community starts from the ground up. Our ambition is to grow a sustainable and greener city, one in which people can put down roots, safe in the knowledge that there is a home here in Westminster for them. Thank you.
Councillor Lisa.
60k to tweet about Sadiq Khan, that's what you get.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I make no apologies for the fact that my lived experience as a tenant of Westminster drives me to deliver a housing service that better meets the needs of our 20,000 tenants and leaseholders. I am not naive. I understand the scale of the challenge ahead. It will take time to redesign our housing service. But Lord Mayor, look at what we have already achieved, a mere 9 months since taking office. Working constructively with the GLA, we have secured funding to support the buyback of 81 properties. Crucially, these homes are all 2, 3 and 4 bed properties and will be a lifeline to those families that are living in overcrowded homes. We've worked with the Passage and others to fund the renovation of Bentley House, which will provide much needed accommodation to support rough sleepers in their journey to a better future. We've introduced our Community Thursday programme, which provides residents with the opportunity to speak face-to-face with staff from across the various housing teams about issues that matter to them. Having joined our officers at these sessions, I have seen firsthand how beneficial the chance to talk in person is for both our residents and officers, helping to foster relationships founded on equality, transparency and kindness. Together with the Future of Westminster Commission, we have established a residents panel made up of tenants and leaseholders who will be central to the delivery of future service improvement plans. While it is right that we celebrate these achievements, we need to look forward to ensure that we continue to bring about improvements for our residents. It is an unavoidable fact that inflationary pressures have hit local government finances up and down the country, and we're no different. Our housing revenue account is particularly sensitive to these pressures, yet we've still put forward a balanced and robust 5-year HRA capital programme, which includes an increase in frontline housing officers and an investment of over £300 million to address priorities around fire safety and climate change. And while we invest to protect the stock we already have, we're bringing forward record levels of investment in temporary accommodation, as the leader has already mentioned. While this will not solve our housing crisis overnight, it will go some way in keeping people nearer to their support networks, help children stay in school, and reduce our dependency on the private rented sector. We all know the terrible toll that the cost of living crisis is having on many households. But hearing the stories from people on our estates brings home the personal nature of what it means to be forced to go without everyday essentials to make ends meet. The proposed rent rise of 7% is a substantial increase and is a decision that I've considered heavily. We need to balance the affordability of a rent rise for our residents with the need to deliver enhanced frontline housing services. That is why we have launched the £1 million rent support fund to help social housing tenants struggling with rent payments during the cost of living crisis. This will also help to alleviate the worst effects of the rise in our rents. Everyone has the right to housing that is safe and secure. I am sure that across this chamber there will have been a shared sense of sadness about the death last year of 2-year-old Awab Ishaq in Rochdale, caused by the prolonged exposure to mould in his home. We want to make sure that condensation and mould is not a blight on our residents. That is why we are investing £600,000 to undertake additional stock condition surveys. Lord Mayor, it is hard to believe that I was elected as a councillor only 2 years ago, yet today I stand before this chamber as Cabinet Member for Housing Services. I will continue to work hard with officers to bring about lasting improvement in our housing services. There is so much work to do with our communities to achieve a fairer Westminster, but we are on the right track.
Councillor Nafska Butler-Palacis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Firstly, like others on the majority party, I want to express how thankful I am to be in the position of speaking on behalf of the administration for our first budget. Colleagues have been able to achieve so much so soon, and I'm grateful to be a part of that.
And for the pay rise.
However, sadly, the government is still the government, and there has been no improvement there. For example, I would like to give you an overview of how we will be spending our public health grant, but I can't because unbelievably we still haven't received any indication from the government about what our public health allocation will be. This uncertainty was described by the Association of Directors of Public Health as one that will result in avoidable and unacceptable harm. The situation is marginally better in adult social care, where we do at least know our budget, but where funding continues to be inadequate. Again, a lot of government funding to deal with the pressures we're experiencing comes in short-term grants that make long-term investment and planning impossible. And of course, the increase of 2% in the adult social care precept is nowhere near sufficient to pay for a service that continually sees increase in demand. However, thanks to an excellent team of officers, we are managing the increased pressures on our budget, and while we have had to find savings, these are not resulting in reduced care packages for our service users. So, Councillor Mitchell, just to explain, yes, we too have had to make savings because of the budget that the government gave us. But, unlike you, I also had the backbone to ask for investment, and that's why we're putting in an investment of $650,000 for our and people with learning disabilities. However, I still have concerns about services provided to our most vulnerable service users that we will need to address in the coming year. Firstly, I'm very concerned about the reduction of NHS services in our borough. The temporary closure of the Gordon Hospital in 2020 is hugely worrying and has had a terrible impact on our residents, on our staff, and on other services. I'm determined that this and other cuts of NHS services in our borough must be opposed, and our council, together with our communities, must use every tool we have to fight them. Secondly, I'm worried about the pay to the home care staff that care for our most vulnerable residents, another issue that the Conservatives did nothing about. I'm very proud that we will soon be signing the Unison Ethical Care Charter that guarantees pay at the London living wage. But to ensure that the ethical charter's aim become a reality, we must look beyond the baseline pay to staff and ensure that they're also being paid for travel time between appointments and that they are not on 0 hours contracts unless they choose to be. This will add pressures to our budgets that will have to be met, but it is a priority for our administration because it's the right thing to do, and it will improve workforce retention and the quality of care for our residents. Thirdly, I'm concerned about the housing needs of our service users with learning disabilities. I was very surprised to find out that under the previous administration, 63% of our service users with learning disabilities are currently living outside the borough, which means that we need more appropriate housing options in Westminster. We are setting up a new steering group with Councillor Noble and officers to explore how we can ensure that in the future more people with learning disabilities can remain in the borough, as well as exploring options for improving the location of day services. All this work would not have been possible without our excellent officers in the Borough team. I have to say, sometimes I'm taken by surprise by how well Borough works. For example, I was a bit thrown by a recent video produced by colleagues in Kensington and Chelsea called Fairer Kensington and Chelsea. Full on with red branding and everything. But they do say imitation Appreciation is the sincerest form of flattery, so I'm delighted that the administration in KNC are learning so much from us. It has also been an absolute pleasure to work with the communities team to support our voluntary and community sector, and we have achieved so much in a few months. We have doubled the funding for the Community Priorities Programme to 600,000 and expanded it to cover areas of deprivation in the north and south of the borough. We have created an emergency fund worth 100,000 to support voluntary sector organisations undergoing a temporary financial crisis. We have supported food banks and food pantries. We now have 3 food banks and 5 pantries, with Emmanuel Food Pantry opening last week and Mary Smith Pantry having found premises on Luther Street. And I look forward very soon to a core funding programme to support the voluntary and community sector with long-term core funding that will give organisations stability and capacity to fundraise more and provide even more long-term quality services for our residents.
Councillor David Harvey.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Dead print, Lord Mayor, so excuse the laptop. Now, behind this budget, there are 2 major components. One, the officers, and we must say thank you to all of them for their work. Secondly, is everyone here. We may disagree, everybody cares about housing and that residents have good housing. But, you know, there's also a hidden elephant behind this budget. That's 18,000-word Labour manifesto. And it strains the art of the possible. And my advice to you is going to be to do less and do it better. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in a housing game of whack-a-mole as problem appears, pledges aren't met, and it's almost a game of Twister. As you stretch across pledge after pledge, you don't meet. So actually, there are some good things you're trying to do them well, and do those things that you can deliver. Now, that's because this budget doesn't touch on things that are massively important to our residents. And that's about trust, well-being and happiness. You can't budget for them quite so easily. But the risk in your budget, the risk in your policies, is where those elements of currency are threatened. I'm not pretending housing isn't tough. It's immensely tough, Councillor Begum. All of us who take it on know just how tough it is. Now, first of all, though, you promised homes for key workers. It's in your manifesto. Your Future of Westminster Commission, or the Secret Commission as I call it, has already called for a review of the lettings policy for intermediate rent home to make an effective key worker housing scheme. But already across Ebury, West End Gate, Luton Street, Ashford, Luxborough, Carpentine and Torridon, some 200 key worker homes have gone, back to 49. On Ebury, an 85% cut, and it's clear talking that's the intention for the future. That means teachers, nurses, junior doctors, planners, court staff, charity workers, police, fire workers. These are people with 2 things in common. They serve the people of Westminster, and your decision so far on intermediate means they have less chance of living here. It's not a key worker policy, it's an elbow in the ribs policy. Secondly, while aiming to maximise the number of social homes is a noble aspiration, the 2005 Housing Commission, which by the way was open, cross-party, involved former Labour ministers, was realistic.
And no fees.
And no fees. That commission actually was realistic about what can be done. You can build more, but you must have a balanced community, and you won't build everything everyone needs. Look at your aspirations for temporary accommodation. You say in Westminster, what it really means after a bit of homework and some quiet discussions, is homes somewhere between East Ham and West Ealing. That's not Westminster. Yes, of course I want those difficult cases to live in Westminster, but it won't always be the right choice. And I say again, if you look at the work of Professor Richard Layard, the new guru of Keir Starmer, he might well challenge your bricks and mortar policies and ask about the happy life. Ask about attainment, education. That's what makes a happy life, not necessarily bricks and mortar. Then your 7% rent increase. Well, you know, I get it. But last year you were like a Greek theatre chorus tearing out their hair, and I love Greek drama. Phaedra last night, fantastic. You have though put £1 million in the hardship fund, which doubles what we had done at easier times. The problem is, will you get it out there? And talking to my residents, they don't know it's there, they haven't seen publicity, and that's how you'll be judged. Get that money to the people who need it. You promised improvements in the repair service, hasn't happened. As Councillor Chamberlain has put it so well, residents actually believe the service is getting worse. You promised an advisory framework you're only getting going with when you have an experimental one we've developed that was unique in London for the number of ordinary residents it would involve and empower. But you have delivered our proposal to employ more housing officers, and I'm really grateful for that. It's the right thing. Of course, so much about housing is sitting with a secret commission. And no those I come across in the community in South Westminster are involved. Perhaps it's so secret they've been asked and don't even know. What I would say, I'm up for commissions, I've done them, they've been useful, but you know, just have a look very quietly late at night at the Nolan principles on the conduct of public life and ask if the supposed way the Commission's working entirely meets those standards. Just think again a bit about that. Finally, leaseholders. They're really worried. They don't know what the service charge increases will be. You've got rid of half-yearly estimates. Actually, they deserve the protection of the leaseholders' charter you promised. Hasn't happened yet. And the major works underway, the building inflation cost that we see, means it's almost second mortgage eye-watering for some of them. Lord Mayor, for tenants and leaseholders in Westminster, living in our housing, for key workers, the fairness called for in your manifesto administration is already starting to fray at the edges. So, time to listen to residents, tie that fraying up. We'll be back for more.
Early in 2019, I made a visit to the Short Breaks Tresham Centre, then run by the Westminster Society. Unfortunately, it was apparent the service was not doing well, and we took the service back in-house, and by July 2019, we opened the newly refurbished Short Breaks Centre on the ground and the first floor. The centre was so successful that by May 2020, there was a growth of 46% of referrals, and at present, the Short Breaks team work with 330 Westminster SEND children, and there is a waiting list for the provision. With this expansion of numbers, we grabbed the chance to take over the upper two floors when vacated by the church. And with the help of my colleague, Councillor Kaplan, we also acquired the other half of the building when the nursery left. Taking over this extra area presented its own problems, as the new space had water ingress, overheating, lift problems, and the cost of providing new facilities both inside and in the expanded outside playground. At the last Children's Capital Board I attended, it was confirmed that a capital bid for £1 million had been granted at full council on the 2nd of March 2022 for the Tresham expansion. This Labour administration has been in power for 10 months, and little has been done to move this refurbishment and expansion forward. In that time, the building had to be vacated and is now operating from the smaller, unsuitable Lyle Stone Street building and other satellite sites like QE2 School. In the Budget Task Group revenue session, it is identified the revenue pressure of £80,000 arises from extra demand and the utilisation of numerous sites for the Short Breaks provision. It is this administration's tardiness and lack of enthusiasm to complete this project that has led to the increased costs and inferior facilities for our most vulnerable children. I have been assured by officers that this project will go ahead in April, but I have my doubts as it does not seem to be a priority. Unlike the frivolous Splash Paddle Park in Paddington Recreation Ground, costing, believe it or not, £600,000. In Appendix A capital programme, the Tresham expansion has been forecast for £1.2 million, £200,000 over the original budget, no doubt because of the delays in execution. The Budget Task Group reports the construction market has been significantly affected by rising costs and labour shortages, which has added significantly to the cost of this project. Speaking to officers, even if the project goes ahead immediately, which judging by past history is debatable, an extra £300,000 will have to be spent to achieve the same quality of refurbishment and equipment, £100,000 more than is being forecast. Without this extra money, the complex needs wheelchair facility will have to be of a lesser quality, and the youth area, preparing teenagers with SEND for adulthood with life skills, will have to be abandoned.
All this uncertainty because SEND is not a priority for this Labour administration. On the 20th of October 2022 at P&S, I asked the Cabinet member why it was necessary to re-establish the Bayswater Children's Centre at what now we know will cost £248,000. I mentioned that we have 3 excellent family hubs, Besborough in the south, the newly refurbished Portman Centre, and the soon-to-be-built state-of-the-art family hub in Queen's Park. We also have the excellent Tresham Centre, on which we were spending £1 million to expand it. The Director of Children's Services, sitting at his side, confirmed this was true. His answer to my question was they were going ahead with the Bayswater Children's Centre because it was in their manifesto. Not much of an answer in my opinion. On the 5th of December 2022 at P&S, I mentioned that the poor Ofsted inspection given to the short break service was the result of it having to use inadequate venues because of the delay in expanding Tresham. I'm particularly concerned about the Lilestone Street building, where the security doors were not working properly and a vulnerable child absconded, but luckily was found shortly after. This was a direct result of the short break service not being a priority for this Labour administration. They are just obsessed with headline-grabbing, frivolous projects. I repeat, Labour likes to talk the talk about a fairer Westminster, but in reality, as I said at the last full council, they are not fair to adults with learning disabilities, and now it is evident they are not fair to children with special educational needs and disabilities.
Councillor Jeff Barraclough.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. On May 6th last year, my boss knew I was up for re-election. He sent me a text. How did it go, he asked. I replied, much better than expected. We have to talk. So I resigned my job, and now when people ask me what I do, I have to say I'm a politician. Much has changed. Much has changed for me in the last year, much more for the city. Cast your mind back 12 months to our last budget meeting. Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister.
Who?
Westminster parents were paying for school dinners. And workmen had just begun demolishing the £6 million Marble Arch Mound. Of the council's Oxford project. And I was sitting up there in the cheap seats asking my predecessor down here whether there would be pedestrianised piazzas at Oxford Circus. Lord Mayor, retailers have been telling us for years that the Oxford Street is no longer of global standard. Too much traffic, too much pollution, crowded pavements, too few leisure options, tired and in need of investment. But let's remind ourselves of the previous administration's response. Hire a rock star programme director at an eye-watering salary of £220,000 a year and build a moth-eaten artificial mountain. The result, £6 million wasted and this council a global laughingstock. But when I made my speech at last year's meeting, I didn't realise the mound was only the tip of the iceberg. The Oxford Street programme wasted money on an industrial scale, burning through £34 million in total before we took over and brought matters under control. So we commissioned Mike Cook, former CEO of Camden Council, to conduct an independent review. We tried to get Sue Gray, but she wasn't available. Okay? The Cook report is sobering reading, as it lays out the reasons for significant spend and limited progress. We're still waiting for an apology from the Conservative councillors responsible for the debacle. Fortunately, Councillor Kaplan is speaking next. Let me summarise the report's findings. The first failing was to procure the whole programme for a single vendor as a design and build contract. This meant that when circumstances changed, and they always do, the relationship between the council and its contractor was set in stone. And this inflexibility proved very expensive because circumstances did change. The pandemic hit, then the council leadership became obsessed with building the mound, and then with managing the fallout from the mound, everybody hated the mound, and then they became paralysed with indecision ahead of the local elections. That's why my predecessor wouldn't answer my simple question. It was still his plan to pedestrianise parts of Oxford Street, but he didn't have the confidence to instruct the team to work on his plan. Distraction and indecision are costly, when you've got an in-house project team spinning its wheels and a set of subcontractors twiddling their thumbs waiting for instructions? Lord Mayor, I've worked in several large organisations and have been very impressed with the culture and ethics here at Westminster Council. Stuart Love and the team have built an organisation of which we can all be proud. So what went wrong with the culture of the Oxford Street programme? As the Cook report explains, staff were unable or unwilling to speak out. If they had, less money would have been wasted. Why was the culture of that team so different? But the real proof of how badly wrong the programme went is in the lack of delivery. For £34 million, we got just the photography quarter, the temporary pavement widening on Oxford Street West, and the Mount. £34 million includes £2.2 million for office that wasn't needed, £1.5 million for an outsourced comms team, where we've got excellent in-house resource, and £1.6 million for strategic visioning.
Frivolous.
And £6 million for the Mount. This at a time when the Conservatives told us they couldn't afford youth clubs. An apology would be nice. Lord Mayor, the new administration quickly picked up this programme, reduced its scope, brought it best practice governance and began wide and regular consultation with local businesses and residents groups. And we've reset the commercial terms with our prime contractor. I would like to thank Bernie Flaherty and Manisha Patel for the great jobs they've been doing as the new officer team responsible for the programme. It's thanks to their hard work that Mike Cook says that the refresh and refocusing is effective and is reducing the programme overhead costs. Oxford Street continues to be a large and complex project, and there remain significant risks, particularly around agreeing a contribution for the private sector for how much they're going to pay towards the programme. But we know what the risks are, and we are managing them. I look forward to a report next year on significant progress, but we need to remain vigilant. This administration will keep its promise to be tough on mounds and tougher still on the causes of mounds. Councillor Kaplan, the floor is yours.
Councillor Melvin Kaplan.
So, on this side of the chamber, we understand a few basic facts. Which is that we lost the last election, and therefore those on the other side, the majority party now, have got the right to set their budget, which they will do tonight, and the budget will pass. Even the opposition said earlier on, we accept the fact that we will not be able to put forward an alternative budget until 2026. We completely accept that. We also accept the majority party waited a long time to be in this position of setting their budget. We might not like the tone of some of the things they have to say, but we're going to accept it because we're Democrats. It's a shame, actually, Lord Mayor, and it's very sad that we have listened carefully and listened silently to most of their contributions, but sadly they've interrupted most of ours. And I find that very sad and unnecessary. There are many parts of the budget that we have tonight. For example. Thank you, Lord Mayor. There are many parts of the budget that have gone unchallenged tonight because most of those budgets were ones that the previous administration had set and the new administration is carrying out unchanged. So clearly, as the majority group that we were, now the minority party, we've got an awful lot of things right. Otherwise, the new majority party would have changed those things. As I'm sure Councillor Fisher will confirm later when he reports back on the Budget Task Group, there are some inherent risks associated with the budget, and those were ones that are part of the Budget Task Group that we examined, and I'm sure he will report back on. Talking about city management, public protection, communities and licensing, hell of a mouthful, I had to write that one down for myself. 80% of the proposals for city management are dependent on income. And there are very few revenue or efficiency proposals. So it's a major risk in terms of those areas. As a couple of colleagues have already pointed out, 3.25 million, a terribly precise figure, is going to come from parking income. Unfortunately, we've been told that we've got to wait to June and July to find out what this is. But it's a terribly precise income, so we want to be pretty sure that the ideas have already been thought out and the plans are already in place. Now, are they going to hammer visitors coming into the city so much that they stop coming? Are they going to hammer people with small cars, quite efficient cars, electric cars? That's the only way of raising that money. We wait till June or July to find out. 5.23 million is being raised from fees and charges, and some of the increases are eye-watering, and this is all happening at the time of a cost of living crisis. 1.55 million is coming from commercial waste, and as the papers tell us, we plan to increase market share and increase prices. Well, that's pretty risky stuff. It might not come off. And then we have some proposals which I find quite worrying, to use parks and open spaces for more events. But again, when we ask the question, they won't tell us what these events will be and where they will be. They're proposing more outdoor advertising screens. And I can tell the majority party, because we've been there before, we need to be very careful here, because a lot of these spaces, a lot of these sites you might want to put these things are completely inappropriate. But again, they won't tell us where. And then there's always one every time that slips through. We always hope that these things didn't slip through, but it clearly has this time, which is a ridiculous proposal for parks not to be locked and staggering parks locking times. It's just simply a really stupid and bad idea, and it needs to be stopped right now. There's a proposal for 700,000 for 9 people in the Communities Department to improve consultation. It's a manifesto pledge, we understand all of that, but that's a lot of money, and we have to ask the question, could the money be spent better? 700,000 being a lot of money. The new administration have a huge desire to deliver on spending reserves and SIL, with no thought at all of what will happen when the money runs out. And Councillor Boothroyd was almost proud of the fact. He called it responsible. But we actually asked the question, it may be responsible, you think, today, but what happens when the money runs out and your colleagues are telling you about all these projects that they want to continue into the mainstream? Because that's what we've heard an awful lot of tonight. In the last 10 months, Lord Mayor, we've had many press releases and announcements and the setting up of lots of commissions. But the real test becomes, can you actually deliver? Because delivery is what it's all about. You can claim for a long time, maybe a year, who knows, maybe a bit longer, it's all the fault of the previous lot. But at some point, you will have to actually deliver yourselves. You've said you'll deliver a fairer with Westminster, but the evidence so far is it all depends which ward you live in, and only some places will see the Labour Party's largesse. We don't call it a fairer budget or a fairer Westminster. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Paul de Moldenberg.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Who would have thought it, eh? What a great retirement this is. Turning out, I've never worked so hard in my life. It's nearly 1 year on, so much done, so much more to do. City management and air quality is a massive portfolio, and we've been out without an executive director and director of highways and director of public protection. So I'd like to thank, from the bottom of my heart, Phil Robson, John Rowing and Nicky Crouch for acting up so ably over the past 10 months. They've done a fantastic job, as have all their staff. Our Waste Action Squad is tackling waste and rubbish dumping throughout the city. We've undertaken over 1,800 enforcement actions against residential waste so far this year, with an expected total of around 3,200 by the end of the year. We've contacted over 1,700 people on our streets since last October. For the first time, we're working directly with the community on issues that matter most to them. We've collected almost 1,000 tonnes of food waste since the recycling service rollout. On active travel, we're developing more cycle routes throughout the city, such as the Cleveland Street cycle route, which we are working on closely with Camden Council. We'll be installing 60 more secure bike hangars, providing safe parking for 360 bikes and 250 cycle stands, giving 500 extra parking spaces. In all, over 850 additional cycling parking places will be provided next year, thanks to the diligence of Max Sullivan, my deputy. We're working with e-bike applications on a dockless e-bike strategy to get the e-bikes off the pavement and into dedicated bays. We're also urging the operators to raise the fines for those who continue to dump e-bikes and cause obstruction to pedestrians. And I'm pleased to say, as a consequence of our actions and the work put in by Mary O'Connor in Soho, Lime have agreed to increase their fines from £2 to £10 in Soho. It's all delivery. We're delighted to be working closely with the Mayor, both in delivering improved cycle routes and expanding the Santander cycle docking station network in North Paddington, where the new Maida Hill docking station is currently under construction. We're tackling emissions from buildings by working with the hospitality industry and property and landowners to reduce the PM25 emissions by encouraging the installation of electric cooking hobs in Westminster's restaurants, bars, cafes and hotels. But there's so much more, Lord Mayor, we've been delivering. Westminster's high streets are now jet washed 4 times a year, from just once a year under the previous regime. 800 more vehicle charging points will be installed by the end of this financial year, with a further 200 more to follow. The introduction of smart charging means that EV owners are saving £4 each time they charge their cars. A user charging their EV car twice a week saves £32 a month. The establishment of the Queensway Strategy Group to tackle some of the deep-seated problems in the area is already delivering. I was delighted when John Zammit wrote to me this week to say there's been a huge improvement in the rough sleepers situation in Queensway, along with other improvements such as hot washing of the pavements, and over 10 new traditional shop fronts gone in between Bayswater Road and Porchester Gardens, and as a result 6 Down Market souvenir shops have subsequently closed. That's what you call delivery. And the first micro logistics hub in Cambridge Street car park in Pimlico opens shortly, where 200 parcels a day will be delivered by cargo bikes, reducing the number of vehicles on the road. And 3 CCTV cameras have been located at dumping hotspots in Fitzrovia, in North Paddington and in Pimlico to pick up the dumpers and take action against them. Lord Mayor, before I close, I want to say how absolutely disappointed I am that Councillor Kaplan has failed yet again to apologise for wasting £6 million of council taxpayers' money on that disgraceful mound that made us the laughingstock of this city. He ought to be totally ashamed of himself. He should apologise now, or else everything else he says is absolutely worthless. I'm enjoying my retirement, Lord Mayor. You know why? This council gets things done.
Councillor Paul Fisher.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. You know, it's not fashionable to say this nowadays, but I'm a big fan of adversarial politics. I think the two-party adversarial system in the City of Westminster works for the people of Westminster. I think it gives them a voice. I think it allows for proper electoral competition within the electoral marketplace. And I am adversarial to my bones. I'm very happy to admit that. But there is a time and a place for party politics. And it's time, just for a moment or two, for me to take my party political hat off and talk about the Budget Scrutiny Task Group. The task group was created just over a decade ago so that the Council could look with care at the budget proposals for the coming financial year and also the medium-term financial plan. And it works because it's cross-party. And I hope that everyone here tonight will agree that it has been run this year as a cross-party, apolitical group, with everyone having an opportunity to provide their input. Because sometimes, when we are working together with all the talents that we have within this council, we achieve better outcomes for the residents of Westminster. And in the report, which I won't go into in any detail, but I'm sure everyone has read thoroughly, I have highlighted on behalf of the group a number of risk areas. Now let me just pause and stress what the group does and does not do. It's not there to crunch the financial numbers. That's what the professionals do. And neither are we suggesting, because that's not the conclusion that I've reached in the report, that this budget is not a robust or prudent budget. What we've done is highlight those risk areas for the future that the council, and that means all of us, and officers and cabinet members may want to consider in the long term, and perhaps in the short term. So we've highlighted a few risks that are, to be quite frank, historic. One of them is PDHU, and that is definitely a historic risk, and one that is not going to be addressed within the course of any one financial year. Indeed, the officers, in response to our questions on it, perfectly legitimate questions, fairly said that it may not be resolved within the space of the medium-term financial plan, because it is a mammoth project. We all know that. It is a significant works project that will take some time. We've also highlighted the historic problems with reducing parking charges and reducing income from parking charges. But again, that's something for the long term. It is a problem that is perennial, I think, across local authorities, but particularly here, where car usership, I think, is down to 20% in inner parts of the city. And we've highlighted a number of other risk areas which is worth looking at. One more recent is the fall in major application fees, which comes as a consequence of the pandemic and is not novel to this local authority. So bearing all of that in mind, am I willing, as the chair of the group, to say that this is a robust budget? Yes. Yes, I am. And I wouldn't have submitted the report otherwise. There are things for us to consider collectively as a group, because we are collectively responsible for it. Secondly, I just want to address what we might do with the group going forward, because at the moment, many people in Westminster don't know it exists. To be quite frank, many members of the council don't know it exists. And I think we can do more with it as part of the participatory budget setting agenda that I think will grow over the course of the next financial year. I've also suggested that perhaps, although it's not traditional, the council considers having members of the cabinet attend the group, because sometimes there are policy questions that might want to be asked and officers are not ideal to answer them. But again, nothing has changed this year from past practice. Finally, I just want to thank everyone who was sitting on the group from both political parties for their contributions, all of which were constructive and productive. I want to thank especially Jake Bacchus and also Gerald Almaroff for their help with helping me to understand the figures and also what was going on, and also the contributions they made to making sure the group worked. And I want to thank Claire O'Keefe, the governance officer, who worked so hard with me during the course of January on this group. And finally, let me just put my political hat back on. This is an historic budget. It is the first Labour budget in Westminster City Council's history. My view is it's robust, but it also helps some of the most vulnerable people in the City of Westminster. And for those reasons, I will be supporting it tonight.
I now call Councillor Adam Hogg to reply to the debate.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. We've heard some important contributions from members in the budget debate tonight. My Cabinet have spoken passionately about their agendas for the coming year and their record of delivery over the last 10 months. And I want briefly to address now a couple of points raised by the party opposite. As Councillors Robertson and Swaddle know, or they would know if they'd done their reading, in our budget amendment last year, we called for a freeze in the general needs council tax. Exactly. In our amendment, it literally asked that the council instructs officers to prepare the 23-24 budget on the basis of freezing council tax for boundary property for general needs. Yeah. You voted against this last year because you had no plan to make that commitment for this coming year. However, you did freeze the general needs council tax in the election year, and your party literature clearly told residents that you had frozen council tax. So, please show some consistency. However, we have repeatedly said, like them, that we recognise the pressures of adult social care that make the adult social care precept necessary in the absence of proper government funding for the sector. And from day one, we have been clear that we are in this for the long haul, and that not everything set out in our manifesto will be delivered on day one. However, they clearly haven't read the budget papers properly, because this clearly sets out that the zero-based budget review and the Critical Friends Board will begin in the coming financial year. When they raised rents by 6% last year, when inflation was lower, they did nothing to help those who are covered, who are not covered by housing benefit beyond the existing hardship fund. However, this year, on top of the hardship fund, we are providing a new £1 million fund directly to help those who are impacted by the rent rises. No support from government, but Labour stepping up. And Councillor Robertson talks about our amendment last year calling for a £1.5 million cut in temporary and agency funding. Now, I have no idea what figures she was referencing in her speech, but as of last month, the forecast spend for 23-24 is £15 million. So that is a £1.9 million cut in temporary and agency spending for the financial year, once we get to the final outcome. And she and her colleagues know full well that she's showing a breathtaking amount of hypocrisy on PDHU. They talked in their climate strategy about the importance of decarbonising. When we came in, the cupboard was bare. If the hot air that has been spouted over recent months by the opposition party was truly a low-carbon heat source, we would have found our solution. But we are making progress, and we will be upfront with our residents about the challenges that it poses, but we're working hard to get every amount of money to meet that challenge. And yes, they mentioned the Council's magazine, and we have cut the cost of the Council's magazine by a third, meeting our commitment to make it better value for money. And as I'm sure she's been told, so many residents have told us how much better your Westminster is than its predecessor, primarily because we made it about them, not about spouting our own messages all the time like it was Pravda. And despite the comments made by Councillor Captain, we have substantial reserves, the most substantial in London. But because we are in the rainiest of days and we're getting little help from central government, we're doing what DLUC, many auditors, have told local authorities to do by prudently investing some of those reserves in our priorities. And despite what has been said on the party opposite, we have found so far £28 million in efficiencies over the coming financial years. And we are going to have to do more until we get rid of this Conservative government that has imposed austerity on local government for the last 13 years. However, it's clear overall that there have been two competing visions of Westminster on show tonight. One of a better, fairer future for our city, set out by Labour's Cabinet tonight, and a more narrow, backward-looking perspective from the party opposite, with no budget amendments or even any new ideas to show they've learnt from the election last May and from their year in the wilderness. And as I and my colleagues have shown tonight, we are becoming a fairer council. We're delivering on our Living Wage Foundation commitments. We're creating a responsible procurement and commissioning strategy, including a new supplier charter. Westminster's first ever modern slavery statement was passed in December, and something that is all the more relevant given the shameful approach the new Conservative government has taken over the last week on this issue. We have a clear plan for action on tackling our pay gaps, particularly important on this International Women's Day, and with a commitment to becoming a truly anti-racist organisation. We have set out a fairer approach to our communities through the adoption of a new antisocial behaviour strategy and by protecting and expanding the number of city inspectors so we can help build a safer community. We are doubling investment in the Community Priorities Programme to 600,000, and we've created a new £1.8 million fund to support arts and culture initiatives at the grassroots in our borough after Robert Davis and co cut them all. As Councillor Rocker and I have set out earlier, we are now delivering free school meals for our residents from the ages of 3 to 14 in our primary and secondary schools, as well as in our maintained and PVI nurseries, saving families an estimated £550 per child per year for 14,000 children. We have created a Winter in the City campaign to support people through the cost of living crisis with warm spaces, food and activities. Just one part of a comprehensive cost of living package that has been bolstered by over £4 million in Westminster City Council funding to deliver debt advice, support for food banks and pantries, grant help for school uniforms for nearly 800 children, more inclusive holidays and activities programme, and additional hardship funding above and beyond the government schemes. We are working to develop a fairer economy by investing in our local high streets and communities, including not only North Paddington but Queensway, Edgware Road, Pimlico and across our city. And we're getting on with the job on Oxford Street in partnership with the private sector and with clear input from our residents. And we're fighting to tackle the dirty money that undermines Westminster's economy and society, in both the commercial and residential property sector, including all we can do to tackle the scourge of candy stores ahead of the required reforms to Companies House. We are committed to creating a fairer environment by driving forward the rollout of our food waste services across the city whilst protecting black bin collections, unlike the party opposite would have done it. No, it's literally black bins. Publishing our ground-breaking environmental justice measure to show how we measure inequality in relation to the environment, creating waste action squads and rolling out new AI-backed CCTV to help keep our streets clean. And we've strengthened and launched the Sustainable City Charter to help businesses reduce their environmental impact. And we have a long road to travel, as councillors Begum and Noble have said, but we're working to deliver the fairer housing that our residents so desperately need, by delivering new housing officers, taking action on damp and mould, by investing £600,000 in new stock condition surveys, and introducing that £1 million rent support fund over and above the existing hardship fund to make sure that tenants who are not covered by housing benefit get help. We are making best use of council land by turning around the council's development plans to ensure we're building 300 more council homes for social rent than were set out previously, getting support from our residents on Church Street, Ebury to do this. And despite what they've said, we have set out clear plans that will deliver over 860 new intermediate homes over the pipeline that is set out. But we are working with our developers to make sure they meet not only the current rules to build more affordable housing, but meet the city plan revisions moving forward with city plan revisions and a new affordable housing SPD that will help them deliver more of the homes we need to come, including and particularly intermediate homes where they can really add value. But making sure those intermediate homes are affordable to ordinary working people, unlike the previous administration's plans. And we supported more than 200 rough sleepers off the streets into hotels and similar accommodation during December severe weather. And we're doing more now as the temperatures drop this week. However, to paraphrase President Biden, we are proud of this budget and our record, but don't judge us against the Almighty, judge us against the alternative. The ancien regime opposite have tried to lecture us on their record and about this budget, but based on tonight's evidence, it's clear they've learnt nothing. Though unlike the Bourbons, they seem to have forgotten everything. From the mini-budget to the mound, you just can't trust the Tories with the public finances. As we've seen from the independent review, Melvin's mistake at Marble Arch was just the tip of the Conservative iceberg of waste on Oxford Street. As Councillor Barraclough has set out, they frittered away £34 million. Labour are fixing up that mess. So, Lord Mayor, the choice is clear. A bold vision and plan for the future under Labour, or a depressing and divisive approach from the Conservatives who are increasingly stuck in a discredited past. Whether it's free school meals, tackling the cost of living crisis, building council homes, buying temporary homes, supporting the London living wage, stepping up action on the powers of urgency, freezing council tax, and so much more, Labour is leading and delivering on the issues we've campaigned for so many years. Lord Mayor, I'm proud to move this first Labour Westminster budget, the first of many, that sets out our priorities as administration and speaks clearly to our values, combining efficient administration with a passion for social justice, as we work hard to build a fairer Westminster.
now vote in turn on the recommendations on each paragraph of the report of the Cabinet. Before I call a first vote, the division bell will now be rung, following which no member will be allowed to return to the chamber until after the votes have been completed. I now call the vote. By a show of hands on the recommendations in paragraph 1 of the report of the Cabinet titled Business and Financial Planning 2023-24 to 2026-27. Those in favour?
Obviously not paying Tony enough.
The Cabinet really put their hands up.
Those against? Those abstaining? There is clearly a majority in favour of the recommendations. I therefore declare the recommendations to be carried. The names of those voting for, against or abstaining will be recorded in the minutes. We now vote by a show of hands on paragraph 2 of the report of the Cabinet titled Capital Strategy 2023-2024 to 2027-28. Forecast position for 2022-23 and future years forecasts summarised up to 2036-37. Those in favour? Those against? There is clearly a majority in favour of the recommendations. I therefore declare the recommendations carried. The next vote by a show of hands is on paragraph 3 of the report of the Cabinet titled 2023-24 Housing Revenue Account, 30-Year Business Plan and Housing Investment Plan. Those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? There is clearly a majority in favour of the recommendations. I therefore declare the recommendation carried. We now vote by a show of hands on paragraph 4 of the report of the Cabinet titled Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 2023-24 to 27-28. Those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? There is clearly a majority in favour of the recommendations. I therefore declare the recommendations carried. Shh. The next vote, by a show of hands, is on paragraph 5 of the report of the Cabinet titled Integrated Investment Framework 2023-2024. Those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? There is clearly a majority in favour of the recommendations. I therefore declare the recommendations carried. Our final vote on this agenda item is on paragraph 6 of the report of the Cabinet titled Pay Policy 2023-2024. Those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? There is clearly a majority in favour of the recommendations. I therefore declare the recommendations carried. That is the end of the voting on the report of the Cabinet. Thank you. Agenda item 5. This is the first of the 2 reports from the General Purposes Committee which are tabled tonight. As stated at the start of the meeting, the opposition group have selected this report titled Member Allowances 2023-24 for debate. After the debate, we will vote on the amendment tabled and then on the amended or unamended recommendations in this report. I now call Councillor David Boothroyd to open the debate.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I move the recommendation of the General Purposes Committee. Some years ago, the Council decided that members' allowances would be uprated each year in line with the salary increase for Council employees, which was agreed by the National Joint Council for Local Government Services. And I understand that was agreed across both parties at the time, and it was indeed the mechanism that was recommended by the independent panel set up by London councils. Unfortunately, we get a problem with that. The council is under a legal duty to agree a scheme for members' allowances for the local government financial year. The local government financial year begins on the 1st of April and ends on the 31st of March. However, the NJC award, the process starts in January, or well, it probably starts in previous December, but the NJC award negotiation has been getting later and later. In 2020 to 21, the agreement was only reached on the 24th of August. In 2021 to 22, it was even only agreed on the 28th of February 2022. And for 2022 to 23, it was the 1st of November. What happens then for council workers is that they get this increase backdated to the 1st of April. That is not the normal process on councillors' allowances. So, although the NJC process started in January, in the context of other pay negotiations that are going on this year, I don't think we are ever going to get the NJC award before we hit the legal deadline, and that's in effect this meeting, to set the allowance scheme for the new financial year in local government. That means that we have to, unfortunately, come back and keep amending the allowances scheme. Now, I don't know about others in this council. I certainly find it highly uncomfortable to have to debate this topic at all. I think I would far rather have some other independent body deciding councillors' allowances. But the law is clear. The law says that that decision is upon us as a council. We are also legally obliged to have regard to the recommendations of the independent panel. It is literally in law. The committee, the General Purposes Committee, noted that some SRAs are significantly out of line with the recommended level and have recommended a modest way of bringing them more into line. But keep within the approved budget. Not all SRAs can be increased this year, but we will keep them all under review. Now, the committee has also agreed to change the dependents and carers allowance policy. This new policy will allow councillors who claim this allowance to do so for 1 hour either side of a defined duty, that's normally a council meeting, instead of half an hour as it was previously. That is proposed because we recognise that it sometimes does take councillors more than half an hour to travel across the city, even when allowing, it needs to allow a reasonable buffer time to turn up at meetings. We don't expect that will have a significant financial impact because that allowance is not claimed very often, but I understand that particular element is not controversial between the parties.
I now call someone to second the motion.
I second the motion.
Thank you. I now call Councillor Tim Mitchell to speak.
Lord Mayor, before I address our amendment, I want to explain that we will be abstaining on the proposed constitutional amendments being voted on later because we believe that they are impractical and won't deliver more real community participation. Lord Mayor, in March last year, the Council approved a rise in all council allowances in line with the Star Pay Award, which ended up at 1.75%. At that meeting, the Labour Party made no proposals to change the special responsibility allowances after they took control of the council on the 5th of May. They again did not take the opportunity to amend the member allowances, even though it can be amended during a financial year, and the 2022 London Independent Remuneration Panel report was available. This year, the General Purposes Committee was presented with 5 options to amend the allowances. Option 1 was freezing all allowances, so recognising the difficult financial situation. Option 2 was a 4.04% uplift across all allowances, in line with the increase recommended this year by London councils. Option 3, a basic allowance increase by 4.04%, but special responsibility allowances frozen, so giving all councillors the same increase, whatever their additional roles. Option 4 was a 4.04% basic allowance uplift and a targeted approach, so-called, to special responsibility allowances. Option 5, the Independent Remuneration Panel recommendations for 0.4% applied as well to the increase. So the Remuneration Panel recommendations and also for 0.4%. Option 2, to take a 4.04% increase to increase all allowances in line with the recommendation of London councils, would have been equitable. Instead, the Labour majority on our General Purposes Committee pushed through option 4, which ignores many post holders and committee members, including all Conservative members apart from me. Option 4 awards a 15% increase to Deputy Cabinet members, a 16% increase to Deputy Leaders, and an eye-watering 45% increase to Labour members, far from modest as the Cabinet Member for Finance claims. Lord Mayor, during a cost of living crisis, these increases to special responsibility allowances are outrageous. I know that the Labour Party will use their majority to push through these proposals tonight, but I hope the Cabinet members, the Deputy Leaders and the Deputy Cabinet members would join me in donating their increase above 4.04% to local charities supporting residents with the cost of living crisis. So I urge the Council to vote for the amendment for a 4.04% uplift across all allowances, in line with the increase recommended this year by London councils. Lord Mayor, I move the amendment. Thank you.
Can I have someone to second the amendment? Thank you. I now call Councillor Melvin Kaplan to speak.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm pleased to second the amendment. And it's actually incredible that we're having to propose this amendment at all. We've heard this word modest proposals. Well, I think as the detail Councillor Mitchell set out, and I will set out even more, these proposals are not modest at all. You'd be forgiven for believing, that this independent remuneration panel was something brand new that Councillor Boothroyd is going to rely on. The first IRP sat 20 years ago, 2003. I've been on the council throughout that time. Not a single time when this has been debated annually at the General Purposes Committee has any member of the now majority party said, what we must do is go with the IRP recommendations. It's lasted for the last 20 years. They were reported in 2006 and every 4 years after that. And at no time ever has anybody from the majority party said that the IRP is what we should go with. In fact, they've gone the complete opposite way. This is the first time, it may be 58 years to get this point to this point, but it's taken them only 10 months to seek to line their pockets with taxpayers' money. It is absolutely, that is what you're doing. When you look at the proposals that we have here, the numbers are utterly eye-watering. 45% for their cabinet members, 16% for their deputy leaders and deputy cabinet leaders. The majority party are awarding themselves £180,000 over the next 3 years. The taxpayers of this city will remember the vote that takes place tonight. You may try and wrap it up and say it's only 60,000. It's 60,000 a year for the next 3 years. And if you read carefully the General Purposes Committee report, what it actually says is that this is the start, because it says the gap from other authorities is still quite big. And so this is the start. And so no doubt we're going to see over the next sort of few years more increases, more money lining their pockets. That is absolutely disgraceful. 83% of the total increases this year go to the majority party. 83% of those increases go to that group there. And they only have 57% of the councillors. In fact, there are 6 less councillors. We've gone down from 60 to 54. So instead of the budget for members' allowances going down, as it should do, it's going up because they want to line their pockets. That is simply disgraceful. Those are not modest increases. What we are, I've never heard such gobbledygook from the Cabinet Member for Finance, who was trying to sort of, I think he was almost embarrassed in terms of what he said he was embarrassed to actually be talking about this. And then he said he was going to rely on the IRP. Well, they've never relied on the IRP for 20 years. Why should they do so today? They've never said that our Cabinet members, when we were in power, should get more money. I've never heard that said once. I've only ever heard the opposite every time at General Purposes Committee that the allowances should be far less. That has been their proposals.
Sorry, Councillor Kaplan, can I just jump in here?
You may, of course, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. It's the penultimate speech. Please can we hear it with just a little bit of respect. Even if we disagree with it, let's hear it out. And then when Councillor Boothroyd has his speech, hopefully the opposition hear it out too. And then we can vote and everyone can go home. So Councillor Kaplan, please carry on.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. When we come to Deputy Cabinet members, I'm afraid Councillor Robertson got it wrong actually. It was 4 times that they proposed to get rid of the allowances for Deputy Cabinet members. Councillor Boothroyd himself, in this very chamber, said that we shouldn't have any allowances for Deputy Cabinet members because people were either backbenchers or they were Executive Cabinet members. There should be no allowance whatsoever for Deputy Cabinet members. In fact, we shouldn't even have them. What hypocrisy to propose a huge increase in a post that the majority party said should not even exist at all. They've also opposed the Vice Chairman of Planning and the Vice Chairman of Licensing. That was as recently as 2021. Now they're in power, they want to keep those allowances as well. Again, double standards and hypocrisy. We know you're going to vote this through, but let us be very clear with you. People will remember tonight when you decided, almost at your first opportunity, to line your own pockets with taxpayers' money. We are proposing this amendment because what you are doing is fundamentally wrong. It should be equity, the 4%, that can be done. Everybody should get the same increase, and we should not have this disgraceful amount of money that you are proposing. Shame on you!
I now call Councillor David Boothroyd to reply.
Yes, I mean, if we didn't have the mound, then we could have afforded it easily. I'm afraid I cannot accept the amendment, but I do think it speaks volumes that the only contribution that the Conservative group make to the order paper on this annual meeting that is deciding the budget is to this little dispute about the allowances. It is a tiny amount of money, £5,000 at the most. The fact is, they had, on the budget, they had nothing to offer us. Almost every other Conservative opposition group anywhere in London put down a budget amendment to show us what they wanted, to show everybody what their priorities were. We have no such indication. They just sit here and abstain of all things. I think they should donate their allowances from this meeting to local charities in respect of the fact that they turned up and did nothing. Doing a Frank Maguire, as it used to be called, if you remember your political history. But they also didn't seem to have listened to what Councillor Swaddle was saying at the General Purposes Committee, when he was saying that he was saying firstly that the 4.04% uplift should be there for this financial year, because it's this year's NJC account, and then presumably next year's, the one that's coming now, just in the next few months when this NJC finally concludes, should be coming as well. 2 bites of the cherry. I don't think the people of Westminster would approve of that. But but he also, and they may not be aware of this, the rest of the group, Councillor Swaddle was expressing severe concern at this committee. If councillors' allowances are allowed to continue to slip across the board, then we have a real issue with participation, as it will be only something possible for someone who is very well off or very poor, he told us. We were weeping. Those in work will be not able to take time off. Well, no doubt, Councillor Swaddle, of course, and the rest of them will be paying close attention to the current local government pay negotiation. The management headline offer 3.88% has been the GMB and Unite are balloting recommending rejection. Unison is balloting straight for industrial action. I hope that can be avoided, because I would hate to see Councillor Swaddle on the picket line outside City Hall, leading the rest of the Conservative group, one out, all out. If they do need to borrow a brazier, I've got some friends who can loan them one. They're busy using it right now. But let me just make the point. Yes, we did make the point about the deputy cabinet members. That's right, because you had so many of them. We have selected some of our group who have jobs to do. They have very specific jobs, and they are doing them excellently. Max Sullivan's work on cycling, Ryan's work on green issues and the climate, Ellie's work on procurement, Robert's work on employment. It's outstanding work. They are doing a job of work, and they get the reward for it. Regulation 90. Regulation 90. Members' allowances, England Regulations 2003 requires this council to have regard to the recommendations made by the Independent Remuneration Panel. It's law. It's law. And I have to say, Councillor Kaplan's memory for once failed him, because I did actually raise it. It was admittedly a number of years ago. I raised it and I said, we've got this IRP report that says something quite different to what we have in our allowances scheme. Why does it say in the report that we've considered it? What does that mean? And the answer that came back was, well, we've considered it because we've looked at it. So we've paid no attention to what is actually in the IRP report. Now, it's like somebody with an unruly dog. One word from me and he does as he likes. The council just simply appointed the allowances scheme that it chose to do. I don't think the majority of the committee can be faulted for deciding that we are actually going to move closer to what the IRP says. It is a fairly modest change. And as Councillor Swaddle requested, we do want a more fundamental review of the allowances scheme. It's not going to be me that's doing it, but it is certainly going to happen. But for the time being, we have what we have here, a set of recommendations that genuinely do take account of what the IRP says and provide a reasonable uplift and come within the set budget for the allowances scheme. So I recommend them.
That concludes the debate, and we will now move to the votes. We will now vote by a show of hands on the amendment to the recommendations in the report of the General Purposes Committee titled Members' Allowances 2023-24. Those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? I declare the amendment to be lost. We now vote by a show of hands on the unamended recommendations in the report of the General Purposes Committee titled Members' Allowances 2023-24. Those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? There is clearly a majority in favour of the unamended recommendations. I therefore declare the recommendations carried.
Point of order, Lord Mayor.
Yep, sure thing.
Standing order 9.16, brackets 4. I'd like to request a named vote and believe that more than 10 members are standing.
Thank you. Councillor Swaddle and 10 or more members actually of his group, if not all members of his group, have demanded a division, and therefore a formally recorded vote will now take place on the unamended recommendations of the report of the General Purposes Committee entitled Members' Allowances 2023-2024. I believe that all members are here and no one's left or disappeared or gone anywhere. As previously advised, the formally recorded votes at this meeting will be undertaken by a show of hands. I will not ask the Chief Executive to call the name of each member of the Council. The names of those voting for, against or abstaining will be recorded in the minutes. I now call a second vote by a show of hands on the unamended recommendations in the report of the General Purposes Committee titled Member Allowances 2023-24. Those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? Again, there is clearly a majority in favour of the unamended recommendations. I therefore declare the recommendations carried. The names of those voting for, against or abstaining will be recorded in the minutes. Agenda item 6. This is a second report from the General Purposes Committee titled Constitutional Changes. We will now vote on the recommendations of this report. The recommendations are deemed to have been moved and seconded. We will now vote by a show of hands. Those in favour of the recommendations? Those against? Those abstaining? I declare the recommendations agreed. That concludes this evening's council meeting. Thank you and good night.